Welcome, everybody, to session two of the 2026 Responsible Raw Materials Conference. If you think you've seen us somewhere before, that's because you have, because this is our seventh year of doing it, which is absolutely mad and really, really exciting. Together with Dr. Rose Clark, we set up Responsible Raw Materials back in the depths of COVID in 2020, back when Pat was still on Zoom. So Pat's one of our speakers today, who proved that he could share on Zoom, not just Teams. It's all good. So back in the depths of COVID, when of course lots of things had shut down, and we thought, well, what if we created a conference that is open to absolutely everybody? And the only thing that we ideally need to have in common is some sort of fascination or interest in raw materials. Now, those raw materials could be when they come out of the ground, or they could be, of course, keeping those raw materials in circulation. And what we've done every year with Responsible Raw Materials is pick a different topic or a different theme to dive into. And this year, we're leading into what is going on in the world, and that is this world of uncertainty and change and perhaps being surprised on a fairly regular basis. And so we thought, well, what if we called our conference Creating Certainty in a Changing World? Now, we've called the title this fairly provocatively because some people have turned around and said, no, you don't want certainty. You want something different. And that's great. So we've been having some great conversations and exploring raw materials through the eyes of how can we improve our confidence in perhaps what's under the ground or what's going on the surface, but also how do we perhaps prepare for the future? A lot of mining projects, for example, take decades. It takes decades to build a mine. So how do we do that? And also as well, it's not just about rocks, which of course pains me because I'm originally a geologist. Actually, a lot of that uncertainty is about all the other stuff that's going on round about, and not least our own changing expectations of ourselves with regards to how should we extract these materials from the ground, if of course we need to do at all. This is a materials challenge. It's all about making sure we keep those materials in circulation, and not just through recycling, because that takes a huge amount of energy, but through the manner in which we design all the technology and the infrastructure that we need. How do we make sure it doesn't break? How do we keep it in existence for longer? How do we design that technology so it makes use of materials perhaps have got a slightly better sustainability footprint, for example? But where we do need to extract raw materials out of the ground, is it something that should always damage the environment and society? And I say that provocatively. Please feel free to come back at me. Or can we use the fact that we're lucky enough to have these natural resources in the ground to act as that catalyst for societal development and change over the long term? But we need to be really considered in terms of how we picture this and how we plan for it. Because if our objective is just to make a load of money, well, then we're probably going to dig things out of the ground in the cheapest way possible, in the fastest way possible. But that might leave us with massive legacy issues in the long term, for example. Please push back on me. I am being intentionally provocative this morning. It is currently just gone 8 o'clock in the UK, which means it's different times in other parts of the world. And today's session, we are welcomed by people who are dialing in from everywhere, from Indonesia and the Philippines, all the way through to different parts of the UK. Now, you'll hear some of them speak with Australian accents, but they're not actually in Australia at the moment. That's just a red herring, isn't it, Joe? But we've got a fantastic speaker lineup for you here today. Before I introduce our panelists, I'm just going to share my screen. So I'll show you what's going on the website, because the way we run this conference every year, we're all volunteers that put this together, and we do it basically because we're really interested in this topic and we love learning from all of the speakers and also all of you who dial in, share your questions, etc. And as you will see, if you're dialed into Zoom at the moment, the chat function is fully functional, as is the Q&A. So please do feel free to engage with our speakers and with ourselves and one another. Feel free to share resources, thoughts, comments, etc. We do have a code of conduct for the conference, which basically says be respectful. So you have been warned. If you are naughty, you will be dealt with. No, don't worry. Actually, we're really keen to hear different perspectives and different feelings. So do feel free to share those. If you are listening to us or watching us on YouTube, again, the chat is fully functional. So please feel free to use that. Or if you're catching up on some of this on LinkedIn, etc., again, we'll keep an eye on those comments. However, if you go to our website, you will see that in the 2026 conference page, this is where you can watch live on YouTube, so you can click that button. But if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, you will see that we have the agenda for this year's event and with all 6 sessions there in all their glory for you. Session 2 is what we're about to go into at the moment. So I'll use this to introduce our speakers shortly. But if you missed out on yesterday's session, or if you want to go back and hear a little bit more about what we learned, what we explored, the session is already live on YouTube. Please feel free to go and catch up on that in your own time. Or if you go and click on one of the speakers, so for example, Isabel from MC Saatchi, she gave a fantastic talk yesterday. If I click on Learn More, that will take me to her page. You can see there's a biography and some additional resources that she shared with us. And because our team is so phenomenal, they have edited her video already and it's already on the internet. So if you click on this, you'll be able to go in and listen to Isabel's 20 minutes. So she gave a little talk followed by some questions. So you'll be able to click on that and you can either watch it in the website, or if you go to YouTube, you get a slightly better version just in terms of the rendering. So you can click on that and you can find out what it was that Isabel was talking about. So that's all in the 2026 conference page. So please feel free to go and explore all of that. Also, what we've got here are, if you go into our past events, you can go all the way back to 2020 and you can work out what version of a phone that is that I'm holding in my hand when we took the picture. By the way, trying to take a picture of both of your hands when you are quarantining is quite fun. So I can disclose later on how I took this picture with no hands later. Oh yes, Miranda is thinking very hard. I can see you there. But what you can see here is we've got all of the talks from 2020 all lined up as well. And let's see if this is going to work today. Get in. Well done, tech team. That link didn't work yesterday. But you can see Christopher Reeves, for example, what were his thoughts back in 2020 with regards to raw materials. So we've had over the years hundreds of people speaking with us. We've had over 400 speakers at our conferences, which means we have hundreds of videos that are all here. Everyone speaks for approximately 10 minutes, followed by 10 minutes of questions. And it's great because we get to learn so much from everybody. We've also got a little resources and learning hub, so please feel free to go and check out that. That includes things like links to lots of the different learning and different initiatives that have been published around the world over the last few years. So lots of different resources for teachers, etc. Please feel free to go and take a look at those. There are actually 173 entries at the moment. If we're missing something, tell us because we can always add it in there. And then also as well, feel free to explore all of our talks because we've got lots of them and they are truly brilliant. So with regards to this session that we have for you just now, which again, if you go to this screen here, click on session 2, you'll be able to find all of the biographies from our wonderful speakers, such as Joe, who is our first speaker here. But I'm going to stop sharing my slides so that we can introduce our fabulous speakers and you can actually see them. First up, we have the wonderful Jo Weston. So she speaks with an Australian accent, but she is based here in the UK. And Jo and I have met through a series that she is very, very much running called Capital Matters, where Worley, the organisation that Jo works with, is organising a series of roundtables around the world, exploring why are we so rubbish at capital projects. So Jo is going to kick us off today. Just before we get to Jo, however, we do have some other fantastic speakers. We're then going to hear from Deanne, who's dialing in from Indonesia. And Deanne is going to speak to us about the formalization trap, paradoxes in Indonesia's artisanal and small scale mining governance, which is going to be brilliant. Now, I know that Deanne is suffering with a massive rainstorm at the moment, so hopefully we'll be able to see her at some point in time, but we also know she can share her slides and we will be able to hear her, which will be absolutely brilliant. Then we're going to hear from Dennis, who's dialing in from the Philippines and has been involved in a big research project there, which is absolutely phenomenal, to be honest, in terms of understanding different aspects of mining legacies. So really looking forward to hearing from Dennis on that. We're then going to come back to the UK, and Christopher Van Dome from Chatham House is going to give us some insights into the geopolitics of minerals. So, Christopher, no pressure there, because of course this changes on a daily basis, but that's going to be brilliant. Then to Edith, and again, Edith is, well, currently based in Leicester, but is originally from Malawi. And Edith is doing her PhD looking at different ecosystem service tools for mining land use decisions. So really excited, Edith, to hear your latest thoughts and opinions on the matter. Then we're going to go in a little bit of a different direction. We're going to go to Pat Bradshaw. Now, Pat is an expert in project risk management, works on some of the UK's largest infrastructure projects. And so really excited to hear how Pat looks at the illusion of certainty in projects. So that's going to be brilliant. And then finally, we're finishing up with the brilliant Maria Alban from the Inter-American Institute on Justice and Sustainability. And she's also from Women in Mining Ecuador, and she's going to be talking about building resilience and inclusion in the Latin American mining industry. So she's not with us yet because it's still very early in the morning for her, but she'll be dialing in shortly. So with that, thank you so, so much to our wonderful speakers for our first session of today. Joe, you've already proven that you can share those slides. If you want to do it again, I will then encourage everybody to please put your hands together for the one and only, the fantastic person that is Joe Weston. Joe, over to yourself.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Very excited to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Perfect. So for thousands of years, human settlement and development has been shaped by access to water. Cities have been formed around rivers, lakes, floodplains, and groundwater springs because we know that water determines how communities can be sustained. In mining, we often forget this. We build pits, plants, and infrastructure first, and only later question whether the water systems can support them. And that is where many of our biggest risks are locked in. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Josephine Weston. I'm an environmental engineer at Worley Consulting, and I specialise in hydrology, flood risk, mine water management, and mine closure. My work sits at the interface between engineering decisions, water systems, and the communities that depend on them. Alongside this technical role, I've also been involved in an initiative called the Capital Matters Program, which is a global roundtable series and brings together senior mining leaders, including CEOs, project directors, engineers, financiers, and government stakeholders, to address a persistent industry challenge: why mining continues to experience cost and schedule overruns. One of the insights that we've been consistently hearing in these roundtable discussions is that many of the uncertainties that undermine mining projects are not external, but are formed when projects are poorly defined at the very beginning. That insight lies within the theme of today's conference, creating certainty in a world of change. And today I want to focus on one aspect of mining where certainty can either be successfully achieved or compound front-end risk, and that is water. Across the Capital Matters discussions, leaders repeatedly describe the same pattern occurring during front-end planning. They are seeing scopes that are incomplete or vague, assumptions acknowledged but not tested, risks captured on registers but not embedded into decisions, and timelines set before work is genuinely understood. These weak project foundations exacerbate risk as the project moves through its life cycle. By the time a project reaches execution, teams are no longer managing risk, but they are reacting to it. And so, if project definition is where uncertainty is created, water is often where that uncertainty shows up first. Too often, water is treated as a box ticker for regulation, addressed through permitting, modelling, or mitigation once engineering concept is already fixed. But water defines the physical and operational boundaries of a mine, and it determines where infrastructure can go, how water moves across and through a site, how tailings, waste rock, and pits behave over time, what communities will accept, and of course, what long-term liability a company will carry. When water is poorly understood during project definition, the consequences are predictable, and they include late redesigns, approval delays, unplanned treatment and containment costs, operational constraints, and ultimately cost and schedule blowouts. These are often labelled as environmental issues, but in truth, they are failures of project definition. A tragic illustration of this is Samarco tailings dam failure in Brazil. As I'm sure most of us will remember, in 2015, the collapse of the Fundão Dam released vast volumes of tailings into the Doce River system, causing loss of life and widespread downstream harm across multiple regions. It has been described as one of the worst mining-related environmental disasters in history. While the technical causes were complex, the broader lessons are not. Downstream water systems were not treated as a defining project constraint early enough. Risk was assessed, but not fully integrated into core decisions. Governance existed, but system-level water thinking and contingency planning fell short. Samarco shows us what failure in planning can really look like, including early water risk definition, assumptions about containment and its consequences, and the integration of water systems into project planning. The river became the pathway for failure, and it meant that communities bore the consequences. The financial, legal, and reputational impacts have persisted for over a decade. Samarco demonstrated that water risk is financial risk, which cannot be managed retrospectively. A different but equally provoking example comes from the Pilbara in Western Australia, near Karijini National Park, somewhere that's very close to me and a special place. So Karijini is not only one of Australia's most significant national parks for its permanent gorges, springs, and water-dependent ecosystems, but it is also a place of deep cultural importance to the Banjima and Yinhawangka people, for whom water places within the landscape hold cultural, spiritual, and custodial significance. Over time, large-scale groundwater abstraction associated with mining operations surrounding the region has contributed to declining groundwater levels in aquifers connected to the park. Traditional owners and regulators have raised concerns about drawdown affecting springs, base flow, and culturally significant water places, even where mining occurs kilometres away from the park boundary. What matters here is not any single approval or licence, rather the issue of cumulative groundwater impact. Aquifers don't care about mine lease or park boundaries and decisions, and therefore made within mines accumulate in these groundwater systems. In this case, groundwater has been treated as an operational input rather than a defining constraint on what development in the region could sustainably support. The result has been increased regulatory scrutiny, opposition from traditional owners whose water places are affected, and ultimately the risk of long-term damage to a protected and culturally significant landscape. Karijini reminds us that water risk in mining is often indirect, regional, and can be time-lagged, and that when groundwater systems and cultural water values are not properly understood and integrated at the definition stage, certainty is lost long before construction begins. From my own work as a hydrologist, I see the same pattern repeatedly. We see baseline data gaps, underestimated extremes, misunderstood groundwater interactions, and closure assumptions that underestimate climate change modelling. Each time, uncertainty emerges not because conditions changed, but because they were never fully understood. In fact, as cheesy as it sounds, water doesn't wait for the next project phase. It behaves according to physics, whether the project is ready or not. If we genuinely want to create certainty, especially in a world of climate variability, water stress, and rising community expectations, we need to change how we treat water in the front end of projects. Before freezing scope or committing capital, projects should be able to pass a simple water definition gate, not just for compliance, but for project robustness. For example, do we genuinely understand the catchment and whom we share it with? Do we have defensible baseline data, not just assumptions? Have we tested designs against plausible future hydrological conditions? And do we understand long-term water and closure liabilities before locking them in? These are not environmental questions. They highlight project value and the acceptability of risk. And when we understand these constraints early enough, the scope becomes clearer, redesign reduces, approvals become more predictable, investor confidence improves, and projects become more resilient to change. This is not about slowing projects down. It's about avoiding the far greater delays and costs that arise when projects discover halfway through execution that water was never properly defined in the first place. So, as we think about creating certainty in a world of change, I'll leave you with this. When water is treated as a design input, not a risk to be mitigated later, we move closer towards mining projects that are more predictable, more resilient, and built better from the outset. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so, so much for that, Jo. Absolutely fantastic. Round of applause, everybody, for the brilliant Josephine Weston. Brilliant. So Jo, with this, in terms of projects, and I think, those thoughts that you left us with there, in terms of when water is actually considered as a design input, rather than that afterthought or that risk that we then have to manage on the fly or retrospectively. Do you see projects changing at the moment, or are we still just not focusing on the water at all?
I think we definitely see a mix across projects. As I mentioned, a lot of projects we see the engineering is locked in and we're given designs and we do flood risk assessment on these projects when we've got engineering set in stone, essentially. But we are seeing a lot of projects where we are being brought in earlier as well. And that means that we really have the opportunity to inform these projects about sustainable design and how that they can best construct their site in relation to water and its downstream impacts, as well as how the site can be potentially protected against water and extreme flows as well. So it's exciting when we get those projects and you have a little bit more of a say in how the engineering should be constructed in relation to upstream and downstream water risks. But definitely it's still progress.
And do you I guess, from the work that you're doing at the moment with Capital Matters, well, firstly, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what Capital Matters is? And then we can come back into, has water made an appearance in any of those discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I gave a brief summary, but Capital Matters, it's a global roundtable series convened by Worley and EY. So we've partnered with EY on this. We've just completed our fourth roundtable, and the conversation has started because EY releases their top 10 risks to mining every year. And in 2025, capital was named as the #1 risk to mining. So this got us thinking about how different stakeholders in the industry are impacting capital. It's not just the engineers, it's not just the owners, it's every single stakeholder related in the sector. And so we wanted to bring together senior leaders in the sector to really understand how each stakeholder impacts and increases capital inefficiency in mining across the project lifecycle. So yeah, we've just done our fourth roundtable. Each roundtable focuses on a different phase of the project lifecycle. So we began in London looking at poor project planning. Then we went to Riyadh, where we dived a little bit deeper into project planning as well. Toronto, we looked at project execution, and then last week we were in Santiago looking at ramp-up challenges and commissioning. And then the conversation is going to continue later on looking at licensing and license to operate challenges, and then it will kind of summarize back in London later in the year. So this has been really good to get these senior leaders, and we're getting competitors in the room as well. We're getting different owners, getting government stakeholders to really understand how they connect with capital inefficiencies and overruns. And it's been really beneficial to be able to have this open and honest conversation with these senior leaders.
Yeah, I think having been lucky enough to have been in three of your discussions, my apologies for not being able to make it to Santiago over
It's a long way.
It's a long way, yeah. But they've been absolutely brilliant, and I think the way in which you are running them allows for people to be incredibly honest and actually pretty vulnerable with what they're sharing. So it's really exciting, and as well. So obviously we have Critical Productions that's been then interviewing yourself and Darren Quayle and a number of the other people behind the scenes, trying to capture, without, of course, breaking any Chatham House rule, etc., what's been discussed within those sessions so that we can share them more broadly. And that as a podcast will be coming out very, very shortly, and we'll make sure we share that with everybody. But Joe, there are a number of questions that are coming in the chat at the moment. And the first one is from Mark, and Mark is basically saying excellent points. And Mark would love to hear your insights on how better water data can be collected to establish those trusted baselines, and how do we move beyond a compliance mindset to report on that water data that would be useful for decisions for, be it mining companies, governments, local community groups, etc.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Mark, for your question. So it's really interesting. We work in regions across the world. So I've worked obviously in Australia, but also in the Middle East, North Africa, and different parts of the UK and Europe. And the tricky part is water data. A lot of the time, open source data is not the best. And obviously, a lot of the mines that we operate in are in very regional and rural areas. So having a significant data set is quite challenging. A lot of the time, open source data has like maybe 30 years of data, but there are large gaps in the data sources, which makes the aggregation complicated. And then if a mine is only in the feasibility stage, they haven't themselves been able to have enough time to capture years of data as well. So that's definitely a challenge in how we're analysing from like a hydrological perspective, having these massive data gaps. So I think it's difficult, obviously, because we're working in regional and rural areas. So capturing water data is hard, but in terms of compliance, yeah, sometimes that becomes difficult. So we need to kind of, as an industry, work out a way to be capturing not just water data, but environmental data more succinctly and be able to capture it over a number of years so that we have these whole data sets as well. I'm not sure if I missed the end part about the compliance in that question, though, Sarah.
No, I mean, I think you certainly touched on it, and you'll see that Mark's asking additional questions in the chat, really leaning into, do you have any comments on the potential for mistrust of the data? So especially if the data is being collected by a mining company and then shared, actually, well, what does the mining company want to find with that data? And is there any, if somebody is there looking at the data sources, do they actually trust in terms of who's collected them, or would it be better for independent parties to collect that data, etc.? I don't know if you've got thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question too. So I think in terms of like the reliability and trust with data collection, I think across the board that's pretty well done. So for example, a lot of mining companies will employ, I guess, contractors or consultants to go out and undertake their sampling and collect water data. So I've gone out to mine sites before and done groundwater sampling. And so that means, I guess, having the third party there creates a sense of trust and reliability around that data, because it's not the direct company itself undertaking that data. But there's also a lot of regulatory requirements for this data collection as well, particularly when mines and other resource companies are going down the project phase. So not just in feasibility, but down into construction and ramp up and operations, etc. So from that perspective, they're touching base a lot with the different regulatory departments too. And that means that there is that trust built between the data collected, the mining companies, community, and regulators as well.
No, it's really interesting. And I think looking at a lot of the questions coming in the chat, it's almost when you're trying to build that relationship, that trust between different parties, then maybe water is one of those areas, rather than seeing it as a problem, it's this massive opportunity in terms of building those bridges, because if nothing else, it's certainly a common interest for all of us, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Brilliant. So with that, Jo, we could speak a lot longer on this, and the questions keep coming in the chat. So I'll point you in their direction to answer them perhaps directly. But everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Josephine Weston. Thanks, Jo.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thanks again for the invitation.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. Brilliant. So next up, we are going to go to a different part of the world. And we are going to go to Indonesia and welcome the fantastic Deanne to speak to us. Now, Deanne, you are dialing in from a big thunderstorm, I think, at the moment. And so it's lovely to see you at the moment, but we will totally understand if you have to turn your camera off. But if you want to start sharing your screen now, I know that you're going to give some of your perspectives with regards to not just Women in Mining and Energy, which is a fantastic organization, but also the formalization trap, paradoxes in Indonesia's artisanal and small-scale mining governance, which I'll be really interested to hear more about. I don't know if you're trying to share your screen at the moment. We can't see it quite yet. But I will keep talking so you can share it without having to speak and click buttons at the same time. And if not, I will hand over to you. Excellent. We're beginning to see something now. But everyone, if you can please put your hands together for the fantastic Deanne. Deanne, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. But I hope the connection is good because it's raining now at my place. Well, let's see, it's a background song, right? Or music. Thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Dian Anggraeni from Women in Mining and Energy Indonesia. Nice to meet you all. And I would like to share about our experience, especially in working with the ISM or artisanal and small scale miners. But before that, I would like to close my camera for better connections.
We can still, excellent. Yep. So we can still hear
Okay,
you,
thank
Deanne, and we can't see you. Back to you.
Thank you. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So a little bit introductions about our organization. So Women in Mining and Energy Indonesia, we call it WIME, not WIME, because we would like to taste Indonesia, yeah? It's a strategic hub that aims to initiate a partnership with companies, government, and other relevant stakeholders through education and knowledge management to benefit advocacy effort on gender in mining and energy sector. So basically, we use self-advocacy to do that. So we have 7 years of impact. We have STEM mentorship program, female STEMs. Or we also have Ruang Leluasa, it's called in English, we call like free space for mental health discussions. And we have multi-stakeholders discussion forum. We call it Ruang XY. And then we also develop ISM networking platform. And we also do the livelihood training on ISM communities at West Sumatra and West Java in particular. But we also actively involved in the establishment of the Delft Exchange Network, especially in Southeast Asia and Pacific, funded by the World Bank, and now the program is end, but the networking is still going on voluntarily. The next one is the STEM Girls for Energy Translation Mentorship Program and Femin Global Mentoring 2025. So with all due respect, I'll just read the presentations because what to say, I have to catch my opportunity to get better connections, yeah. I hope this is will lead to more fruitful discussion for unclear or more explanation needed, yeah, later. So the first paradox that I would like to see that we will actually is not only in the regulations, but I would like to give introduction in about regulation of ISM in Indonesia. So we have quite what to say, a lot of regulations, but not so much in ISM. But thanks to the advocacy from many people, we now have like the regulations number 4 of 2009, and then we have amended to law number 2 of 2025. Law number 2 of 2025 is the fourth amendment to law number 4 of 2009 concerning mineral and coal mining. These regulations amend the previous mineral law and regulates mineral and coal mining in Indonesia. Mineral law is actually the small scale mining and concerning mineral and coal mining that we call it minerba, mineral and batubara. So the current implementations of the mineral and coal mining law focuses on prioritizing mining business permits for cooperative and medium enterprises and religious community organization, as well as funding for universities from mining management to increase added value and economic equity. This implementation also involved transferring supervisory authority from regional to central governments, focusing on downstream industrializations and addressing legal uncertainty in overlapping areas. The goal is to realize more equitable natural resources management and provide economic benefits to communities. Maybe some of the audience wonder why there is what to say, NGOs like religious community organizations involved in this business. Well, actually, me too. But we can discuss it later if there is someone would like to know more about this. So priority is given to cooperatives, micro, small, and medium enterprises, and religious community organizations in the mining of metal, minerals, and coal. This aim to enable local communities and small businesses to participate in managing natural resources in line with Article 33 of the 1945 Constitution mandate on equitable distributions. So I think this issue also facing by other countries in other parts of the world. The demand for minerals and metals continue to grow, driven by technology and green energy transition. However, traditional mining practices often result in deforestation, water pollution, and habitat destructions. Sustainable practices are essential to address these challenges and gain public trust. New regulation and its amendment is aimed at improving the ISM government with focus to, first, devolutions of authority. This is to oversight of mining activities is transferred from regional to central governments. Second, compliance and transparency. The goal is to achieve better, more transparent and accountable mining governance. One of the tools is online self-submissions. The third one is open access to more stakeholders group in ISM business, like I already mentioned, is also include for religious organizations. However, this effort is still create new challenges and the illegal mining remains unsolved. So I would like to highlight three paradoxes. First paradox is regulatory paradox. First, increased administrative requirements leading to decreased compliance. So the last amendment of the law of the mining and the ISM actually increased administrative requirements. Yeah. Weak regulation oversight or inadequate regulations. There are no effective implementing regulations at the regional level. So artisanal mining activities are often unmanaged and considered illegal. Difficulties in establishing WPR and IPR. WPR is the government process for establishing people mining areas and people mining permits. It's slow, with stringent technical requirements forcing many artisanal miners to continue operating without legal standing. So it's create legal gray area. This situation creates legal confusions and burdens for local communities because their activities lack a strong legal basis. And the last part is lack of community participations. Communities are often not optimally involved in decision-making processes related to mining policies, leading to conflict. Yeah, it's still very centralistic in the process of law making or regulations making. So I would like to show you about our national monument. It's called Monas. This is the real gold. The interesting fact is this gold, actually its contribution from illegal miners from Lebong district. The ISM or artisanal small scale miners in mining in Lebong district, actually it's already exists since Dutch colonialism. So it's more than 100 years. The photos of the miners. However, until today, the central government is not willing to give the areas of the mining, the ISM mining, as a legal one. Many advocacy, like from People Miners Indonesia or APRI associations, try to advocate the government, but the result is not clear. Until today, is still under considerations. The second one is the economic paradox. Wealthy natural resources coexisting with low welfare for local miners, despite the price of the gold now is higher. Resource-rich regions in Indonesia often experience the resource course, where high activity, small-scale mining, or the ISM generate intense local economic activity, but fails to create long-term prosperity. This paradox is driven by poor resource management, reliance on unprocessed raw commodity export, environmental degradations that destroy alternative livelihood like farming, and low local human capital. Women at risk due to uncertainty of the ISM business. Thus, they have more than just double burden for income generating. Sometimes they have to leave their children or family to work abroad, to work other regions, or living in poverty. So I have fun facts about manganese. This photo is from manganese locations in Tasikmalaya District, West Java, Indonesia. So according to the research of Monash University, collaborations with two prominent universities in Indonesia, the fact about manganese, if the soil contains a lot of manganese and you don't mine it, then the soil less fertile. Once you mine the manganese, you take out the manganese, the fertility of the soil will be increased. So it's a very good thing. So people like in Tasikmalaya, they have their own land to mine the manganese, and then they also do farming. They also do other activities, and they can create more, what do you say, secure living, because they have adequate or sufficient income from not only from farming but also from the mining. However, they also not get any permits, or they get not any decision from the central government to make this their sub-district, Karangnunggal sub-district, that as WPR. Yes. So it's mean these are illegal for them, and now the mining activity has to stop. And many people, it's getting poor now, because farming in Indonesia, especially for the ones who don't own land, it's not enough to feed the sufficient to food as a labor of a farm, what to say, business.
I think we might be losing Diane a little bit because of the rainstorm.
So the third one is governance paradox. Centralization, effectiveness. Local wisdom not accommodated. Local wisdom values such as caution and prohibitions against over exploitations are not integrated into existing artisanal mining management. Most of artisanal miners do not understand how to access formalization process, lack of facilitators, and lack of direct assistance from government. This is because their status is illegal, so the government doesn't want to come to there to give support. Law enforcement are still weak in many places. So I would love to emphasize about the ISM in the democratic governance in the point of view of one of our co-founding fathers, Dr. Muhammad Hatta, or we call him Bung Hatta, which is he is also first vice president of Indonesia. Bung Hatta emphasized that democracy is not only political, but must also encompass economic democracy. According to him, political democracy without economic democracy will only result in inequality, not prosperity for all people. He said that democracy must be taught. Therefore, the government is obligated to educate its people about democracy. The question is, how can the miners learn and practice good democracy if most of the ISM locations are remain illegal, especially for the ones that relevant to be legalized with the considerations of our national constitutions? So the conclusions of these presentations is, first, the new regulations and power relations in ISM governance tends to be an antithesis to its initial. The second one is, many problems arise when the government open opportunity to religious organizations, etc., to be involved in ISM business. Meanwhile, the current miners, who numbers approximately millions of people, are still struggling for recognitions and waiting for so long to get permits. The last one is the advocacy for better governance of artisanal and small-scale mining to be fully formalized is still ongoing. So, referring to our activities in our network, Delft Exchange Network, some of the miners already giving up because they cannot survive, but others still fighting for it. So terima kasih, thank you very much. For the ones who interested to see our works, you can visit our website in wimeindonesia.com. Thank you so much.
Deanne, absolutely amazing. Thank you so, so much for all of that. Absolutely fascinating and a great insight to, as you say, what a paradox, what a conundrum that has been put in
Yes.
place there. Maybe one quick question for you. So you mentioned the religious organizations, and I guess you raised that question saying, well, hang on, this isn't necessarily helpful involving religious organizations in this. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sorry, it's freezing because the connections.
It's okay.
Okay, you want to know more about the religious organization, why the government put inside it.
Yeah.
Many CSOs like us, advisory from the civil society organizations, asking that questions to the government, and we quite, what we say, noise about it. But the government simply said, because I think it's easier for us to supervise because we have like two biggest organization or religious organizations in Indonesia from Islamic religions and also other organizations from Christians, Buddhists, and also Hindus. If we go there, so we can collaborate with these organizations to also help the government supervise and manage the business. So this answer is very insufficient and a bit ridiculous with all due respect to my government. But this is the situation that we have to face. We keep advocate the government. I think until this probable regime, the government still missing the point. If you want to support the ISM to make this an asset to this country, make them legal and provide the capacity building. So some religious organization decline the offer and others accept the offers. But now they have to face the criticism of the people, the civil society. So please pray for us, and we have this ISM in Indonesia will have a bright light in the future. We would like to have the same support like in Philippines or some countries in Africa. They have so many, what to say, very significant progress, yeah, or maybe significant support from the government. Is it answer your questions?
Yeah, no, it does. And I know there'll be more questions in the chat for you as well, Deanne. And so with that, thank you so, so much for a fantastic presentation. Everybody, round of applause for the wonderful Deanne.
Thank you so much.
Brilliant. So next up, we're going to both the Philippines and to Australia because Dennis is currently in Sydney, which last time I checked was in Australia. But Dennis is going to be talking to us about a fantastic research project that's going on in the Philippines. Dennis, congratulations on sharing your slides. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah, and good day, everyone. Quickly, in 10 minutes, I will present our project, which aims to develop a site-specific rehabilitation system underpinned by the local community's knowledge and practices as a model for wider implementation in other legacy and active mines worldwide. We've received funding from various institutions to undertake this ambitious project started in 2022. And we selected one pilot site abandoned for more than 40 years, and the indigenous peoples have started to reclaim it for housing and agricultural use without any rehabilitation activities. They are aware of the risks, but because of their strong connection to the lands, they went back after the mining company, and 90% of the community there belongs to indigenous people. We investigated the three subsystems in the community to understand the breadth and depth of the problems, and we put the local community as a central feature of the project. We are 15 chief investigators and over 30 research assistants to date from different sorts of discipline. Our first challenge was to access the community actually due to the resistance. It took us more than 6 months of long negotiation, both online and face-to-face, guided by the indigenous knowledge systems and practices. It's a series of steps shown in the figure. It's an arduous process, and we adhere to that process that they imposed to us. We work with the community guided by our framework, which is available online, with the ultimate goal of empowering them to make leadership role and develop their technical skills to implement rehabilitation strategies. We ensured equitable access for diverse demographics, including women, youth, school children, and people with disability. Before we co-designed rehabilitation strategies with the community, we conducted a range of analysis, including X-ray and electron microscopy of rocks and soils, to identify the minerals present in our samples. Also, we used drone data to reconstruct the site's topography, enabling us to develop a three-dimensional model of our site. In addition, an extensive water analysis was carried out, and results show that all metals exceeded the local and international standards. We also tested hyperaccumulator plants from the site, earthworms, and bacteria, and used them for mesocoastal experiment to develop the best mix for growing hyperaccumulator plants to clean the site. I am leading the social team and explored various social data and developed a working version of the data cube using QGIS, integrating the environmental, technical, and social data. We use this data cube to work with the community to inform our decisions and to co-design rehabilitation strategies. Some of the things that we did include providing farming support to make their farming practices more efficient to increase their yields, and year one monitoring results show that farmers have increased their capital outlay by more than 20%. We addressed also the low literacy of primary school students by establishing reading centers in schools, and we trained teachers for teaching literacies and trained students for book writing to document their aspirations for the environment and for their future. Safe and abundant water supply was one of the main concerns of the community. We identified potential water sources and installed leach bed to reduce water pH for agricultural use, and we also installed water tanks across the farming beds in the area. We trained local researchers and they become part of the research team. We involved them not only in sampling and data analysis, but also provided them with various opportunities to lead in the dissemination of the results in national and international conferences. We organized a citizen science in 2 schools through campus journalism. This is one of the extracurricular activities of the Department of Education of the Philippines. But for the longest time, the schools have not participated in any activities due to the lack of skills and resources. The organic farming activity was mainly for women, but other men asked to participate. And together with the Department of Agriculture, we organized the training, and experimentation is going on at the moment to test their technology. Our project is underpinned by the principle of inclusion, which is one of the best features that we have. We also address the livelihood needs of people with disabilities. We provided them with capital and training to venture into tailoring, and the local government unit provided a place for this enterprise. One organization has been wanting to venture into organic livestock production. We provided the training and resources, and after 9 months, they have perfected the technology for swine raising, and more than 60% of the raw materials are from their surrounding. Now, based on our initial work in year one, we developed this social environmental transformation framework we co-designed with the community. One feature embedded is number 14, our exit strategy. After 3 years working with the community, we are enacting our sustainability framework with the community as the central feature leading this project. Now, from those activities, we organized and supported our project taps into 9 UN Sustainable Development Goals, from no poverty by funding community economic activities, including people with disabilities, to partnership for the goals by building strong partnership with local and government units. Our project has resulted to many publications, and they're available online, and conference presentations as well. We're also featured in many national and international news outlets. We were amongst the 14 selected projects that exhibited in the 2024 Royal Society of Science in the United Kingdom. And just to introduce our team, these are the chief investigators from the other 4 institutions. Some of them might be familiar to you. And currently, these are the things that we are doing, rolling out the sustainability framework for our exit strategy, and also refinement of the data cube, particularly in visualization. We are working with a data scientist to do that, to ensure that the community would be able to understand it and use it. And also deployment of community-driven wastewater treatment facilities, evaluation of socioeconomic activities, and many other projects going on at the moment. So if you have any suggestions to further improve our project, please let us know. And I hope I did not go over 10 minutes. Just to guide you with the framing of your question, I'm a social scientist. I'm not a technical person, so that would help you to frame your questions around my expertise as well. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Dennis. Fantastic. Round of applause. And don't worry, you are being beautifully on time. So you get a gold star with regards to that. So Dennis, with regards to the project, I know that you gave us the overview. Before you started doing research there, did any of the research team have connections to the community, or like where did all of that come from a social perspective?
During COVID, we have another project involving a legacy mine, but in 2022, we proposed a project to one of the funding agencies of the UK, and we get rejected. And so we find another opportunity, and we identified a legacy mine. And in the Philippines, there are many legacy mines which were abandoned before the Mining Act of the Philippines was implemented. So before, the mining company can just leave the area without any rehabilitation effort. And one of these that we have identified is the Santo Niño in the northern Philippines. We don't have any connection in the area. We went there, the Philippine team, including me, went there and started talking with people about their concerns before the project has started. And then we said, yes, let's take this area because it's very interesting. And majority of the people come from indigenous people's groups. So no, we don't have any connections at all. So that takes us 6 months of negotiation amongst local government units, the barangay government units, and also with the indigenous people leaders, because they have a very, very unique structure. Though they have the local government unit, they have also the indigenous people's leadership unit that protect the area as well. So yeah. So from mistrust, now we're integral part of the community,
And
which is
so,
really great.
so with that, I guess, I mean, with your social scientist hat on, there's a lot of discussion about parachute science, and especially so, for example, research projects that are led by, say, places in the UK or Australia going into different parts of the world and say, right, we're going to come and do research to you. Now, I'm not saying that's what you're doing at all, but have you had any discussions with people about how you're not doing that, I guess?
That's one of the challenge, the issue that they've raised actually when we went there. They don't want any researcher anymore because for more than 3 decades, researchers come and go, and they were promised of so many things, but nothing happened. And that's one of the things that they raised. So we negotiated with them that we're not one of those researchers. We built that kind of trust, and so there are so many issues they've raised, including the use of some terminologies. Even our title, biomine, they don't like it because the mine or mining triggers something in them. So, but we explained it to them. We went to the community, and even the word sampling, when we say we get samples, for them, sampling is an exploitation because they were exploited for how many decades. So there's lots of tensions and mistrust, and it took us more than 6 months to build that small trust little by little. And so we promised to them, and we delivered our promises with them. And so we involved them right from the beginning. We said that your views, your perceptions, your knowledge and skills will be integrated in the project, and you will be the central feature of the Biomind project.
So maybe building on some of the questions that are coming in, how did you start building that trust? And so, for example, Diana's asking, like, how did you overcome that very initial opposition? How did you begin to open the door and show that you're not just like all those other researchers?
So we followed all the rituals they imposed to us. So there's tribal rituals. We participated. We outlined all the activities that we'll be doing. We outlined all the things that we should not be doing, and agreed. And we signed up with memorandum of agreement, not only at the community level, but at the regional level of the National Council for Indigenous People. So we went all through all those legal processes. It's an arduous process and very expensive, plus time, because we lost 6 months of the initial time that we should be doing all the activities. Yeah, it's very challenging, but once we gain their trust, every time they hear Biomind, they gather in the hall that we're using every time we get there. Last week, actually, the water team went there to monitor the water sources that we're planning to install. That will be planning to use for water for agricultural and domestic use.
So building on that, this is another question that's come in from Nadia. And Nadia is asking, could you tell us a bit more about how the community leadership was developed? And I guess that kind of ownership by the community in the project. My apologies, Nadia, if I'm misrepresenting your question, but kind of tell us more about it. So they went from really not wanting you there at all to now, I guess, I mean, do they own a lot of the research and what's being done now, or what does that look like?
So when we started the project, we went there and then we started presenting our project. And I said, we need to stop telling them what we will be doing, but instead we're going to have the conversation with them, what they want with the community. So instead of coming from the position of privilege and power, we empower them to voice out what they want in the community. And we ensure that all those views and perceptions that they have, we've got massive data set, interviews, survey, we integrated that in the initial plan that we have. And every activity that we do, we co-design it with them instead of imposing what we want. We listen to them and we build, and that builds trust with them as well. So yeah, it's a co-design project, and I think that built a lot of trust. And in terms of leadership, we identified those gatekeepers and we tapped them. We involved them in every sampling that we did and we are doing at the moment, and we have constant negotiation with them. And one of the process that we did as well as part of our permitting was every time we have a result, we have to go back to the community and provide them the opportunity to interrogate the data. What do the data tell them, and then how they can use that to help us develop and enact rehabilitation strategies. So there's that constant communication, empowerment, and transfer of leadership as well.
So that's brilliant. How have you find it trying to get the other academics, so the technical researchers, to understand that actually this might take longer, or there are slightly different ways of doing the data collection, etc. How's that been?
So it's quite challenging from our team because we're only 3 social scientists and mostly engineers, geologists, and many others. Right in the beginning, we always have this communication that we have to do this X, Y, and Z in a certain period of time. But I keep on telling them that we have to manage our expectations. It's not a straightforward process that when we go there, we can get the sampling. We are dealing with people with emotions, perceptions, and views, and knowledge and experiences. And this might take a while. So from positivist kind of thinking, we go to a more social kind of thinking. And it's really amazing to see how the team evolved in that process as well, from the positivist approach to a more social approach. And also, having that coming from a privilege, from the position of privilege and power, to a more relational kind of approach with the community. So we're actually thinking to write a reflection paper amongst the team members, how they changed their view in terms of working with the community, coming from from the technical point of view, and uh, finding the nexus between the technical field and the social science field.
And so just finally with that, if you were to redesign the project, because I suspect that when the proposal was put in for funding, it was designed primarily by the geologists and the engineers with a very strict timelines and everything. If you were given the power to go back in time and redesign the project, is there anything you would change?
I will bring in more social scientists in the beginning, because in the
Yeah.
beginning I was the only social scientist doing it. And I think my advantage is I could speak the language of the community. And my background as well is in biology and environmental science before transitioning to social science and education. So I could understand both. But if I'll redesign the project right from the beginning, I'll bring in more social scientists in the team. But yeah,
Brilliant. Well, with that, the learning here is put the social scientist first, everybody, because that way we can design a much more robust project that actually puts the communities and the people on the ground at the top of the agenda rather than perhaps the science, shall we say. But it's all very important. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dennis. And this is a fantastic example of where we should be going with a lot of our projects. Thank you very much.
thanks, Sarah, and thank you, everyone.
Brilliant. Excellent. So next up, we are going to go from Australia, the Philippines. We're going to come back to London. And you've already heard us talk about Chatham House earlier on today. Well, everybody, we brought Chatham House to you, not to necessarily talk about the Chatham House rule, which is perhaps one of the most famous things about it, but to introduce you to Christopher Van Dome, who I was lucky enough to get to know earlier on this year. Christopher has hosted me on a panel in Chatham House, but also, Christopher, I guess you've been doing a lot of research and investigation into the world of minerals and what does that mean around the world. So everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Christopher.
Oh, good morning, Sarah. Thank you very much for having me. And apologies, I've also been struggling with some internet issues this morning because central London it seems, just as vulnerable to difficulties of connection as every other part of the world. So, big topic this morning of certainty in a time of change. What I'd quite like to talk about really is something that I've been working on recently, which is the idea of credible commitment. So within an uncertain policy environment, how is it that we can understand what is it that's going to stick, what policy decisions and what choices are actually going to have some form of longevity, and what is it that sounds good and the rhetoric's all there, but it's not really embedded strong enough for us to start making decisions around. So this is something that I've been working on in a project at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. But I'm going to look at several how we understand this idea of credible commitment in the US, in the UK, and then production countries in Zambia and Botswana, because that's where my research has been. So just to start off, the idea that I'm talking about of credible commitment, it is exactly what it says on the tin, is that how can we understand that policymakers are committed to the policies that they have set out, and then also this idea of how do we understand it to be credible? So do we really trust what people are setting out? Do we really trust these policies and these frameworks? And do we really trust that they're still going to be there in 10 years' time? And one way of characterizing this problem is quite a simple sort of two-stage decision process, and this is going to be incredibly reductionist for your incredibly well-informed audience. But just as a simple way of demonstrating what I'm trying to talk about is, there are huge sunk costs involved in the mining industry, and those sunk costs have a very long gestation period from the moment that capital is invested through to production. And then once you're producing, you're then dependent upon operating in an environment that is set at that point of investment so many years ago. So how is it that you can understand that the policy environment that you're investing into is going to be the same once you actually come online? So very simple way of understanding this. A company has a decision. You can either invest or not invest. If you don't invest, nothing happens. If you invest, governments can then decide, well, do we want to stick to these policies or are we going to change them? And in the case of a producer country, this is often a way of understanding resource nationalism, where governments are always incentivized to either outright expropriate, as we saw in the sort of 1960s, 70s, or reduce the net present value of mining projects down to zero through creeping expropriation, creeping nationalism, through the increasing of tax, royalties, and other financial and other policy pressures on companies. So that's a very simple sort of overview of what I want to talk about and what I've been studying a lot recently. But it also extends beyond producing countries, and we can use this as a way of understanding policy incentives and mechanisms currently being used by countries who are trying to incentivize mining, either mining or processing, either domestically or friendshoring, as part of the critical minerals race. So if we look at the four countries that I like to quickly talk about, the country that is doing the most rapidly at the moment is probably the United States, driven by obviously their desire to de-risk their exposure to China and the Chinese dominance of processing minerals production. One of the ways of understanding the certainty in the US system is that the way in which the government and the organization of the US political system and bureaucratic system is structured is that you tend to see that policies that have a lasting impact are those where you have the creation of vested interests within the bureaucratic system. So once the government has decided to do something, you then need to create within that American bureaucratic system, within the different departments, you need to create budget lines. You need to create people who are going to be defending those budget lines. You need to create the agencies around implementation. And once these are created, there's almost an inbuilt inefficiency within the system that makes it very, very difficult to shift, to change, and to repeal what has gone before. Another way of understanding this is also sort of what are the drivers for policy change. And so a lot of the rhetoric around security at the moment is one of the ways in which it's going to make it very hard for a following administration to repeal some of what's going on, because you've built a domestic audience who understand the connection between mineral supply and national security. That's sort of now already been baked into this sort of participatory democracy within America. So what are we talking about in the US? It's if we look at what they're doing with Project Forge, essentially an update of the Mineral Security Partnership. So under the Biden administration, the creation of the Mineral Security Partnership, driven by the ideas of a green energy transition, driven by the idea that we need to increase mineral production quite significantly and globally in order to meet these global objectives around the energy transition. The shift from that to where we now stand with the Trump administration, Project Forge, and Project Vault and stockpiling, really, there's this shift in rhetoric towards the security. That has a much more sort of long-standing appeal, as I say. What we're trying to see is that will the next administration be able to repeal Forge in the same way that Trump, okay, he built on the MSP, but it's really taken quite a different turn. And again, if you look at where the departments and agencies are being built up, it's within the Department of War. You've got the Industrialization Capacity and Modernization Office. You've got the Defense and Logistics Agency. You've got various other research agencies and implementation bodies sort of already set up. Now, one of the biggest risks that we see when we look at the US on all of this is what it's doing externally. So when you see that what the US is doing in DRC, for example, it's sort of twofold. One, the deal with Glencore for a group of partners from the US under Orion, essentially not necessarily deeply with deep historical knowledge of the mining industry, taking over an equity position in order to shore up supply. But a lot of what's going on is quite personalized. It's definitely centered around the office of the president. It's centered around Trump himself. And so this is why it becomes very difficult to start making any long-term decisions, because the more focused around him it is and the more it's based on personal connections, the shorter the greater the risk that an administration that follows is going to be able to repeal and undo it quite quickly. If we look at the UK, things are moving a lot slower. I'm constantly reminded by colleagues in America that the UK doesn't have anywhere near as much money to throw at this problem. But the UK system operates in a slightly different way, in that within the UK system and the UK bureaucracy, it's not so much about building those same vested interests and agencies and implementation bodies that you have in the US. The UK civil service, and this may come as a surprise to anyone who's actually tried to work with the civil service, but actually it is quite nimble. And it is quite able to change position. I know this isn't necessarily the sort of the yes minister or the in the thick of it sort of view of the the British bureaucracy, but it is, and those bodies, that sort of implementation framework, it is designed to do so, to implement government policy. So where do we get credible commitment from? How do we understand what the government, the longevity of government decision making? And in the UK, it's really about that broader network of interests and alliances and input into the system. So it's civil society, it's organizations like Chatham House, Satala. It's that whole network and body of people who are working on these issues who are feeding in. That's where we can see that there's going to be some longevity. And there's a couple of, the UK Civil Services Nimble discuss, exactly. I think one of the challenges that we see in the UK at the moment in terms of the longevity of some of its decision making or some of its policy pronouncements around critical minerals, I see two challenges. The first of is the idea that what the government's trying to do is demonstrate that mining is important. Unfortunately, a lot of the conversation in the UK over the last 10 to 15 years has been very anti-extractive. And so there's apart from outside of the sort of engineering networks, a lot of the policy community and a lot of the wider sort of academia, civil society, particularly on the political side and the social science side, has been very anti-mining. And so it's becoming very difficult for the government now to put in place a set of mining policies in a mineral strategy that's saying, right, we need to do more in this space. Because a lot of those networks and agencies that feed into the system are saying, well, we don't want anything to do with it and it shouldn't be here. So that's one of the challenges. The other challenge is that, again, the way that the UK is approaching this isn't by setting up singular issue places within its sort of policy framework to say, right, this is going to do this on minerals. What we're doing, or what the UK is doing, is looking for the quick wins of where do we have existing policy measures that can feed into or support our critical mineral strategy. So where do we have existing measures on energy that we can then say, and this is going to support critical minerals. And this is, for example, the energy support for small businesses and industry. It's like, well, that can be extended into mineral producers and processors. and similarly around sort of the measures for small businesses and so on. Also the National Wealth Fund, and that's what the UK Critical Mineral Strategy has really been pushing is, well, we've invested this money into Cornish lithium, but it comes out of a National Wealth Fund that is there for various other things. And so again, the sense of longevity isn't there. If I look then at a couple of other very quickly case studies on the producer countries, and perhaps you have some questions on this because I'm conscious of time. Yeah, if we look at the difference between Zambia and Botswana, for example, for what producer countries are doing in order to try and demonstrate longevity, Zambia has always been a challenge in that I think that the mining code has changed 9 or 10 times in the last 17 years. Even when President Hichilema came into power in 2021, there was this expectation of, well, finally, here's someone who's a bit more pro-market, who's come out of the business side of things. And one of the first things that they said, even against international advice, who said just work with what you've got and try and implement that. They said, no, we're going to do our own new thing. And so this makes it really, really difficult. So there's a lot of attention on Zambia at the moment, but there aren't any new projects in the pipeline. I mean, this is one of the really big challenges. If they want to meet their 3 million tons a year stated target, which is a really long shot, especially when they're producing about they're currently producing around hovering, plus minus 1 million tons a year. To make up that, they would need the equivalent output of 10 of their largest producing copper mine to come online, and they don't have anything in the pipeline. And one of the challenges is exactly this, the policy uncertainty. Now, if we look at what's happening in how Botswana have resolved this problem, there's several means, but one is the creation of a minerals policy committee. So you have the permanent secretary from the Treasury, from the Ministry of Mines, and the permanent secretary from the Office of the Presidency, and you have, I think, the Speaker of the House, and you have the Attorney General. So you have essentially a depoliticized committee of technocrats and civil servants working with external third parties who then negotiate on behalf of the politicians. This takes the sting out of what would otherwise be, quite tense negotiations around seeking national benefit and so on. That's one of the things that they've done. Another one is if you look at the example of De Beers in Botswana and the structure of the company, there's an internationalization of business structures. So not everything is in the same country. De Beers, the diamond market is very different to copper in so many ways, but this idea that companies need to be putting business services in multiple different countries, digital services, the back office functions around those services, by placing those in different countries, you actually add a certain degree of protection, and that's one of the ways in which companies have to start thinking when operating in these spaces, so that they can lock in governments, and governments aren't able to shift policy so easily. So those are a few high thoughts around the topic of how do we try and bring a sense of certainty into a world of uncertainty. But yeah, happy to answer questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Christopher. Just coming into the conversation, and I'm just going to remove your spotlight so that we can all see one another. Check out how this conference works, isn't it? One moment you're talking about research in the Philippines, and the next moment you're trying to get under the skin of how different governments work and what on earth is going on with minerals policy around the world. Isn't it brilliant? One of the questions that came in from the chat from Lucy is to your point where you mentioned that the anti-mining sentiment in the UK and saying that is, kind of still the case. Do you think that is changing at the moment, or what do you think is going on with regards to that?
Yeah. So there's a few things. So one, I think within the government itself, I think if you look at the different departments and where their interests are, it's just sort of you stand where you sit. I think that the thinking in the Department for Business and Trade is, well, how do we locate the UK? How do we put UK businesses into this conversation? So they're a bit more obviously pro mining, but also very much focused on the sort of the service sector and finance, insurance, and the City of London and so on. If you look at the Foreign Office, I would say the Foreign Office are still in a position where, having merged the Department of International Development and the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office together, there's still a sense of development being the priority. So within the critical minerals conversation, the main objective should be, how do we make sure that critical minerals demand leads to development in emerging producer countries? Now that's admirable, and I spend most of my time in Africa, and it's obviously what they want, and it's obviously something that the world needs. But in terms of a national sort of critical mineral strategy, it's like, well, is that should we be encouraging production, and should we be encouraging British mining, or should we be saying, well, other people do it and we're going to fill in the gaps to try and build those development linkages? I think if you look within bits of the Cabinet Office, there's still quite an attention on, well, can we still play a global role in a more sort of command economy type thing, and look at mineral chains of supply chains of the past, and can we be a dominant player in overseeing that? So the different bits of the system are looking at this in different ways, but not that many of them are really saying, right, we need more mining, and mining, mining is the bedrock of all of these other things that we want to achieve. If you look outside of that in academia, yeah, I've just come back from a session in Cambridge over the last 2 days. I've spent a lot of time sort of particularly in the social science space. Yeah, I think that even if it's not necessarily anti-mining, I think that the thrust of UK social science sort of attention on mining at the moment is very much sort of, how do we these things about this is bad for the environment, and how do we mitigate that, is probably the closest you get to a desire to work with the industry. And beyond that, in the social science space and in the policy space, there's still a lot of sort of resource curse discussion, which, the actual empirical the empirical data around the resource curse is actually incredibly mixed. It's much stronger for oil and gas than it is for mining. But that seems to be where the conversation is, rather than sort of reflecting on the mining industry and saying, okay, there are problems, but like, how do we as social science researchers fill in those problems? How do we create solutions, rather than just sort of say the answer is no mining?
Yeah, I think to that, I mean, I've had a lot of discussions where trying to put together, be it research groups or groups that can really think, well, hang on, how do we, what should this look like over the, in the next 5, 10, 50 years? And it is really interesting. I think that a lot of mining is such a deep-seated emotional topic that, especially in the social sciences, people they do not want to engage for a whole variety of reasons, which is a problem, because as we've just heard with the Philippines, actually the key to success are the social scientists. And so working out how do we engage together. I think one final question before we move across to Edith. So going back to Zambia and Botswana, so you were mentioning that, or you said that there's no pipeline of projects in Zambia, which is interesting, because I think, we all hear about KoBold and what they're doing in Zambia, etc. And so there's some sort of high profile things that are going on from a geological perspective. There are beautiful rocks, for example, in Zambia. When you say that, is that more from a political perspective in terms of a pipeline of projects, or do you want to just expand on that?
So new copper mines, so new greenfield sites. So you look at KoBold is an existing mine. The other big three sort of producers Mopani is going through its own transition and rehabilitation. Same with KCM, and then there's a lot of reliance on output on First Quantum at both Kansanshi and its operations down at Kalambilo, and where there's been an increase in production over the last sort of 12 months, partly in response to higher prices. That's been driven by expansion of existing operations rather than new copper mines, new greenfield mines that are coming on. And so, Zambia is moving in the right direction. There's a lot of exploration in the country, but yeah, the mines that they would need to hit their targets, those aren't even being developed yet. And so again, it's sort of one of the conversations that we've had with other governments in Southern Africa is that there's two ways of viewing your relationship with the private sector. One is, and what I would say is the better way, set your frameworks and then let them be, and then let people come in and operate within the set frameworks that you've got. Again, don't change them, leave them, and allow people that certainty. The other one, which I think is a bit more where we are and what we need to move away from, is that they view a relationship with the private sector more as an ongoing conversation. But that means that you have an ongoing conversation with the existing players, and a new market entrants who aren't part of that conversation just look at the situation and think, well, this is a really, really difficult environment to operate in, because it is dependent upon having that sort of ongoing conversation rather than just having, here's your framework, come and invest. And the way that the legislation is and regulation is now is exactly how it's going to be in 10 years' time. So there's that need to shift beyond, let's talk to our existing players, and there's a need to think more broadly about the industry of, well, let's just set something and encourage many more people in.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much for that, Christopher. And just in terms of this topic as a whole, on Thursday at 3:50 UK time, we're going to be hearing from Melody McNeil from PAX. And PAX is one of the groups that spun out of USAID. And so again, seeing some of this, I think it'll be really interesting listening to Melody and almost kind of comparing it to some of your insights, Christopher, especially on the US side, and then focusing in on Africa and really trying to understand, okay, that this is where the rocks are, but also as well in terms of the opportunities for societal development. What does that really look like, and what are we truly aiming at here? So brilliant. With that, thank you so much for Christopher, for coming and joining us, and congratulations on all the research you've been doing. Round of applause, everybody, for Christopher Van Doorn. Thank you very much. Brilliant. So we were talking about Zambia and we were talking about Botswana. Now we're going to go to the fantastic Edith, who is originally from Malawi. Edith, we met when Edith just started her PhD, originally with a background in water. But Edith's come and spent time with me up on our farm in the northeast of Scotland, which has been absolutely brilliant. So I don't know, Edith, you are a brave, brave lady, because the weather in the northeast of Scotland compared to Malawi is ever so slightly different. But you brought certainly some of the Afro beats into our farmyard, which was a brilliant addition for everybody, including my dad and everyone else. They were like, what is going on? This is awesome. But everyone, please put your hands together for the fantastic Edith. Over to you, Edith.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I just want to check if you can hear me. I had to put on my headsets because they've suddenly started constructing outside.
Yep, we
without
can
warning.
hear you.
So
Yep,
okay, I hope you can't hear any of the constructions. So as Sarah said, I am Edith, originally from Malawi, and my project here at the University of Leicester is focusing on the ecosystem services tools that decision makers will be using for different land users. And today I'm going to be sharing part of my research, looking at how you can navigate those tools for mining land use decisions. So we have a challenge where we have competing land users because mining doesn't operate in an empty landscape. It has to compete with other land users like agriculture, water resources, rewilding itself, as well as the community priorities. And then this happens all in an environment where companies are facing increasing ESG and regulatory pressure to actually justify the decisions that they're making for their organizations. Now, this is all happening in an area of uncertainty, but then the mining sector does have frameworks that help them with that uncertainty to make things a little bit more certain, such as the UNFC, which is basically a global principle-based tool that is used for the classification, management, and reporting of resource projects. And this can be used at any level of production, from exploration all the way to rehabilitation, depending on what project you're looking at. Now, what I'm focusing on here today is how do we feed into the E-axis? Because the UNFC operates on 3 axes. The first one being the environmental, social, and economic viability, where we're looking at the cost of this project versus the benefit of it. It also operates on the technical feasibility axis, which is looking at what technology is needed for this project to go forward and how mature is that technology, and also the degree of confidence that we have in the geology. Basically, how much do we know about the resource that we're trying to work on in our project? So I'm looking at how do we fit into the E-axis? How do we create certainty in the environmental, social, and economic viability? Now, one way to do that is through using spatial tools, which could be ecosystem service focused, because these can quantify the environmental and social aspects of projects or decisions that we're making. They can help us to compare scenarios of what happens if we mine in this certain location and we remove some forest cover here, or how much of the forest cover do we remove in this area or put in a different area. And the end, this supports decision making, especially at the early start of our mining activities. Now, my focus has been to do a quick scoping review. So my quick scoping review has looked at the tools that exist and if they have been used or if they can be adapted to be used for land uses of agriculture, mining, and rewilding, with a focus on ecosystem services, where I'm looking at ecosystem services that would be valid and valuable for all 3 of these land uses, which are nutrient delivery, biodiversity impact, economic benefit, and carbon sequestration. And just a side note, all of these lovely pictures I've taken here are taken from where I'm doing my case study in Buckie in Scotland, at a farm called Carnfield. And so this nutrient delivery picture is from a stream that passes through the farm. The biodiversity impact picture is from a ladybug that I happened to walk by as I was doing some water sampling. Economic benefit is literally just a farm field of barley at the farm, and carbon sequestration is some of the woodland that the farm has. Now, so through my quick scoping review, I was able to find a number of tools, but the more prominent ones have proven to be 2: ARIES, which is artificial intelligence for environment and sustainability. This is a web-based platform that uses artificial intelligence, AI, and modeling to assess ecosystem services. So for ARIES, I have used the K-Explorer because it has a number of layers where you can be as detailed as you need to be. But I'm using the very first layer, which is supposed to be able to allow even the most non-expert user to be able to have an environmental impact assessment, an ecosystem services assessment. And here I was focusing on sediment delivery, which is basically how much topsoil gets moved into a water body. And this also would be able to inform how much of the nutrients that would be coming from things like fertilizer application end up in your water bodies, and how that later on is going to impact on the surrounding environment and how it's going to impact on water supply to the people. So for this tool, the inputs itself are here on the picture on the left. We can see this land cover, C factor, contributing area. These are all maps that are linked to open source database linked to the platform itself. So these are not inputs that you as the user get to define. These are inputs that already exist. Now, because of the way the system is set up, it's able to only model for either national level or regional or local authority. So in this case, I was only able to model for the whole of Moray, but then the little red dot there is actually where the farm is. That's where my focus is. So you can see how I have a bit of a large data set, but then my focus is literally just the 1 point. And from the scale that we could be able to see from the blue to the red tells us just how much of soil per tons per hectare would actually potentially end up in our water bodies over the course of the year. And lucky enough, it seems a lot of the region isn't in such high numbers because they all seem to be in the areas between about 5 to 10. So this was the first tool that I was able to look at. And the second tool is the integrated valuation of ecosystem services and trade-offs. Now, this is a suite of models that have been put into basically a package, and they allow you to model for different ecosystem services, as we can see on the picture here on the right. And this also allows us to have some scenario analysis where you're able to change different land uses and figure out, okay, what then happens if I change this piece of farmland here into possibly a mine, into possibly just a wild landscape, and it'll be able to help you figure out, okay, this is what it's going to look like in the future, this is what it looks like now, and possibly a few years back, this is what it looked like. Now, for the inputs of this would be on the left. Here, you need to collect all of your inputs. And the only thing that the tool actually requires is that they're in the same projected coordinate system. So these would be GIS spatial-based inputs. You'd have a digital elevation model. You'd have basically a lot of maps of different things that go into the tool, and then you're able to produce the image on the right. Now, because I can define the area, and this tool is also based on catchments. So it looks at a river network, and it'll cut out a piece of all of the land, all of the cells that would therefore fit into the river networks in that area and give you basically a map. So here I'm able to define that, okay, this is the catchment I want to work in, and the red dot is actually where the farm is at. So this gives us a closer picture of what I want to look at as opposed to Aries itself. And we can see that from here, a lot of the areas on the farm particularly are below zero, as in about below zero of well, a little bit above zero, sorry, my bad, a little bit above zero of tons per hectares per year of potential soil that is being moved into the river system. And the lighter areas would be closer to 5 or 10. So after looking at all of these tools, what I've been able to glean is that the data drives the outputs. It depends on the input data quality and the local relevance. So for Aries, the data sources would be the linked open source databases, and these are global databases. And the scale is from a local to national scale. You cannot go below that. So some of the and this only means that some of the interpretations that you may get, they may not be as accurate as you would need, because firstly, the data is global data, and it's there are going to be some generalizations. There might be some gaps there as well, which would not be perfect for very site-specific modeling. Whereas in VEST, you get to define your data sources, you get to look for your data sources, get them to be as accurate or as detailed as you need them to be. And it's also operating at a catchment level, so you can make a catchment as big or small as you need, depending on the areas that feed into that river network. And this is important, especially when you're looking at, if you're trying to make decisions for a mine of what to remove or what to put in a mining situation, because you need to know about the local quality of the data, the local context, and everything else that is involved in that. So at the end of the day, when you're navigating uncertainty in this area, we need to remember that the tools themselves, they will not remove uncertainty, but they can help you organize it. And we just need to be responsible about how we define the assumptions and the validations that we're using. We need to be transparent about what we're using, how we're using it, where our data is coming from, any gaps in the data, how are we going to validate this data, how are we making sure that this data is as accurate as it can possibly be, and just be transparent about the limitations of the tools we have and the data that we have as well. And so at this point for me, I think the next steps in my studies would now be to look at both of these tools and do some scenario analysis to maybe try to compare some different pieces of land, because maybe I may not have mentioned, but then the reason why I'm working on Carrickford specifically is because this is a farm that has all three of those land uses I was talking about. There's agriculture production taking place, there is rewilding, there's a great woodland on the farm, and we also have mining activity in quotes because it's mostly quarries, but then this is something that could be, once we figure out which tool is best to use and how best it can be used, this is something that could be then be translated to other places that would have the exact same profiles, where you have to make a decision between your agriculture use, your mining use, or your rewilding use, and how best you can go about getting the most out of these uses for the environment, for the economy, and for the people. So thank you very much. That's all for me.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very, very much, Edith. Round of applause, everybody, for the fabulous Edith. And yeah, just, well, I mean, firstly, thank you very much for talking so beautifully about my home. So that's the farm where I grew up in the northeast of Scotland. And as Edith quite rightly says, we are very much exploring what are the best things to do with the land. My dad said to me a number of years ago, he said, if I didn't have to feed you lot, I would have looked after this land in a very different way. And I think, that's pretty interesting. And so whilst now we have lots of researchers and different monitoring tools everywhere across the farm, and my mum and dad wonder what on earth is happening, it is brilliant because it means that we can use this research to help change things with the land. And as Edith says, we are making changes and then able to monitor them to see if it's making a difference. So Edith, you mentioned comparing and contrasting with some other patches of land. Where are you thinking of looking or comparing Cairnfield to?
So at the moment, there's a farm that's pretty close to here in Leicester. It's called Ellerton Farm. And one of the reasons I'd like to go here is because they have a lot of data. So part of the validation process is looking at what the model is giving you and looking at what the actual data says from actual field sample collection to see if these are at least similar or in a range that is enough to give you confidence to say that, okay, these tools are actually as accurate as can possibly be. So one of the farms we're looking at is definitely Allerton, right here in Leicestershire, mostly because it's better than an 8-hour drive.
What do you mean? And what about home? Because I know that we discussed maybe you being able to do some research back home in Malawi as well.
Yes, so there's definitely potential for these tools to be used there. I think there's an area in where there's a new mining company as well, I think, in Songwe, where you have surprisingly very fertile soils, and the locals, I think, are not aware that the soils are so fertile because they have a lot of is it lime or something that makes it more fertile. But then there are some people there who are engaged in ASM, artisanal mining, who may not want to let the people know why their soil is so fertile because they're trying to access the rocks. So it would be an interesting thing to look at. Okay, so we have a hill that has this project. There's a lot of agriculture happening. There's some mining happening as well. But then we also need to protect the environment as well because it is in a very rural area. So how do we make this decision? How do we manage the land use here in this area? So it's definitely an area I'd be interested in looking at.
Brilliant. And I think, I mean, this is one of the things that's really exciting about your research is almost being able to do the scenario analysis and say, well, what if it was artisanal and small scale mining first, and then could the agriculture then come in later? Or actually, is it better not to dig the rock out of the ground and to just lean in and optimize the agriculture? Or should we just leave the land alone because it has deeply significant cultural heritage, significant applicants, for example. I think that's really fascinating in terms of being able to use reproducible tools to assess what the difference in options might be.
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. Edith, one final question before we move on to our next fabulous speaker. And this comes in from the chat from Sadia, who's asking, what would you say is the most interesting or surprising thing that you found out about your study area with these tools? And I know that's difficult, me asking that to you.
So the most interesting thing I found about the study area is, well, the fact that using these tools, the results that you get, they're not the same.
Mhm.
And this could be a factor of the quality of the data that goes into it, because one of the farms that I was looking at the sediment delivery ratio was I was able to pinpoint that in this particular piece of land, one tool is saying that about 5 tons per hectare of soil is coming off of this per year, but potentially as runoff. And the other tool is saying that no, it's actually only half a ton. So you need to go back and look at the tools and say, okay, considering that activity that is happening here, considering that we're using tractors and the like, is this really possible? Is this feasible? Does this actually make sense? And then you need to start looking at, okay, what are the inputs? What's going into the tools? What needs to change? Does it make sense or not? And the like. So it's definitely the surprising thing would be about the tools are different. The results you get are different. They're modeling for the same thing, but then because of the data that they have, because of the access that it has, you will get different results. And I guess a very surprising thing would be that you would find peacocks up in Scotland.
Yeah, our next door neighbour has peacocks, which spend most of their time, I think, somewhere on our farm because I think there's more food for them. Brilliant. I think just, yeah, one final thing. So I certainly hope that the soil runoff isn't as bad as you're saying it could be. But that's also something from a farming perspective, things like making sure you're leaving vegetation or growing something on the fields all year round, etc. So something's there to hold the soil. Certainly some of our next door farmers that are on very different soil types where it's much lighter, as soon as the wind blows, that soil disappears. Whereas we've got much heavier soil, it's got much more clay content, so it doesn't tend to disappear as quickly, for example. But it's really interesting from those tools. And I think final point on that, one of the things that we've been finding, there is some global biomass and effectively carbon stock tools that are out there. And we tested some of them because we've been measuring exactly, you know, what is the biomass, what's the carbon stocks within the woods, within the bushes, the hedgerows, etc. And we've done this across 3 different farms in Scotland, including Cairnfield. And quite disturbingly, we found very different results in terms of how accurate the Planet Labs biomass tool was. And in one case, it was 2000% out. So it was overestimating that biomass by 2000%. That is a problem, because if people are using this to help them understand where do you need to do offsets, things like that, if you've got some of these global tools that haven't necessarily been calibrated in the right way, that's then a problem. Not saying that they're bad tools, but they do need to be calibrated and anchored, or at least have the specific context so that you're talking about something that's a bit more real. But it's really exciting seeing some of your early results, Edith. Thank you so much. Everyone, please put your hands together for the fabulous Edith. Round of applause. Brilliant. Okay, so next up, we're going from the world of research in the northeast of Scotland into the world of project risk management. Now, we heard earlier on today Josephine talking about water and its role with regards to the success of projects and a whole load more. So go back and listen to her talk if you didn't manage to dial in early enough for that today. But now we're going to go to the fantastic Pat Bradshaw, where he is not only returning the favour because I spoke at one of his events recently, but also Pat is going to give us insight into the world of risk management within projects. So with that, over to you, Pat. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay.
Yep.
Hi everyone, my name is Pat Bradshaw. I'm a risk manager for a specialist risk practice called Optimise, based out of the northwest of England. In case you couldn't already tell with my accent, sounding like an extra out of Coronation Street. That reference might fall on deaf ears, actually, for those that aren't from the UK. Very flattered to be asked by my friend Sarah to contribute to today's discussion. As those of you who know will appreciate, she left my brief deliberately ambiguous, which meant I had to think quite carefully about what I actually wanted to discuss, which I thought would be useful to share. As a risk manager, obviously I spend a lot of time operating in the may or may not, the uncertain space. So it might come as a little bit of a surprise that what I want to talk about today, which is the opposite of that, which is certainty. And of course, the two are obviously inextricably linked. They often get conflated. And I feel like that's where some of the biggest issues in infrastructure projects start to emerge. So what I wanted to do today was explore a few areas where I feel they blur the line between, where the line is blurred between certainty and uncertainty, what that looks like in practice, what we can do about it, and ultimately the impact that that may or may not have on how effectively infrastructure projects are delivered. As mentioned, I'll try and keep this relatively high level and hopefully just give you all a few useful reflections to take away. In the context of raw materials, I'd be lying if I said I had even a hair's experience of some of the amazing panelists, or all the amazing panelists have. However, I'd like to think that some of the themes that I'm discussing today will be applicable in any context. Also, would like to caveat that I am particularly passionate about the natural world. And one of the great advantages of my role in infrastructure projects is using it, hopefully, to make the world a better place. Let me get to the next slide. So that's my lid in the middle, obviously. Bit of an agenda, so just a very brief journey today. I won't make it War and Peace, don't worry. A bit of an intro into the topic. The soundbite of today's session, which is the illusion of certainty in projects. Some of the points of the psychology of why I feel that may or may not be the case. Some areas where I feel like uncertainty and certainty get conflated. QRA, where I spend a huge amount of my role, where I've spent a huge amount of my time in the past 5 years, and sort of discussing insights versus illusion. Known but not acted on. So again, I'll go into a bit more detail on that in a moment. And lastly, reframing certainty. So just giving some sort of final thoughts. So a bit of a journey today. Again, I'll keep this high level. Hope everyone's impressed. This slide took me longer than the rest of the presentation. I was showing off to my wife yesterday, and she was bored by it. So hopefully you find it more interesting. So I graduated in 2015. I did law at university. Didn't want to be a lawyer. It just so happened that that degree seemed to suit my skill set when I was at school. When I graduated from uni, I did not want to go straight into work or further education. So I did the adult thing. I went traveling for a couple of years. Spent about 18 months in Australia, where I did all manner of jobs, which I'll touch on in a moment, what I think is relevant. I did call centres in Sydney. I was speaking to people about charity on the streets in Sydney. I worked on a building site. I delivered the Yellow Pages in Perth. I worked on farms in Queensland, did removals in Brisbane, basically anything to prevent me from coming home. Also did about 6 months traveling across 5 different countries in Southeast Asia. When I got back, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. So just by chance, I happened to meet somebody who worked in recruitment, and they felt that my skill set, from my personality, relatively extroverted, as well as some of the stuff that I'd done in Australia, sort of lent itself to that. Spent 3 years doing that, which was incredibly tough. I know the industry does get a bit of slack, and from my experience, I worked for a company that deserved the slack, and I worked for one that didn't. But I don't regret a thing. I think it teed me up excellently well into hitting the ground running a career in risk management, which happened by chance, which I'm sure most people that you speak to in risk will agree that is the case. Nobody grows up saying, I want to be a risk manager when I grow up, but it's the best thing that ever happened to me. My flatmate at the time, I'd just recently been made redundant at the start of the pandemic, and my flatmate at the time was still worked in recruitment. He said, I've got an assistant risk practitioner role across my desk. Do you fancy it? So yeah, why not? Nextly, just very, very quickly, in terms of my journey to date from a risk perspective. So at early tenure in my career, I spent some time doing some work in the aviation sector, moved on into a QRA only function in the highways projects. From there, I spent the greatest proportion of my career in the rail industry, where I worked with some fantastically talented risk and project professionals, who I owe a huge amount to. From there, I spent some time in nuclear projects, sort of highly regulated industries, which moved me on to my sort of the commission I'm in at the moment, which I'm enjoying thoroughly, which is in the Great Grid Upgrade for National Grid. So a bit of an intro. So this session, I'll be exploring how projects create a sense of certainty through planning, analysis, and governance, and how that can sometimes actually mask underlying uncertainty. I'll share several observations of my own experience working in these major infrastructure projects, particularly in the risk context, obviously. And just a caveat, these aren't definitive conclusions. These are just reflections on patterns and trends that I've noticed. So I'd very much like to be challenged on those if anybody disagrees with anything I've said, or likewise, if anyone does agree and sort of any thoughts and feelings that they've got off the back of that. Cool. So the illusion of certainty in projects then, so it sounds like a bit of a soundbite, but bear with me. So when we talk about projects, we tend to focus a lot on uncertainty and how to reduce it, eliminate it. But in my experience, uncertainty isn't always the real problem. The problem is how we actually respond to it. And we often replace uncertainty with something which feels a great deal more comfortable, which is actually certainty. However, oftentimes that certainty isn't actually real, it's constructed. So what I mean by that is programs, they're built with precision, milestones are dialed in, costs are locked in, which creates the illusion of control. But more often than not, the assumptions that have been used to underpin those decisions can oftentimes be immature or just not quite fully understood. So in theory, on paper, everything works, everything's understood in inverted commas, but in practice, things can rarely pan out that way. So what I wanted to talk about today isn't how we remove uncertainty, which might sound strange coming from a risk manager, but it's how we stop pretending that we already have. So just a bit of a segue, I don't think it's any real secret that infrastructure projects, particularly in the UK, don't have the best track record when it comes to meeting baseline in terms of time and cost certainty. And if you've worked in that space, it's those ones that have sort of spiraled out of control, derailed, which are the ones which will leave a lasting taste in the mouth. And so I feel like it's very natural to want to respond to that by trying to take control. So we're fixing the scope, we're fixing the cost, we're fixing the program. On the face of it, we've got a really firm grip on everything. But in reality, that can sometimes and oftentimes do more harm than good. And absolutely, I'm not tone deaf. I understand that the leadership team need confidence and stakeholders need reassurance. But when we create a fixed plan too early, any deviation from it can feel more significant, not necessarily because we can't react to it or it can't be managed, but just because it feels a lot more unexpected. I've alluded to the psychology of certainty here, but I probably should have said the psychology of avoidance, because what I'm referring to here are some of the reasons I feel people are naturally inclined to avoid things that are particularly scary or even harmful, and then will potentially anchor to something which feels a little bit safer. So ambiguity, obviously it feels threatening, it's uncomfortable, uncertainty is uncomfortable, so we tend to default what feels known, even if it's based on optimistic or even incomplete assumptions. Identity is tied to control, so acknowledging risk can actually feel like we're out of control or we have a lack of control. So uncertainty is sometimes softened or even delayed rather than confronted head on. Avoiding conflict, I think that's just a natural human behavior. Challenging assumptions can sometimes create tension, so it's often easier to align to the plan and then deal with those issues later, essentially kicking the can down the road. Successes increase pressure, so the bigger the project, the greater the pressure to appear confident and in control, which makes honest conversations around uncertainty and indeed certainty may be a little bit more difficult. And lastly, no shared playbook. So large infrastructure projects will always bring multiple teams together, but I feel from my experience, there's rarely a consistent approach to aligning assumptions and challenging collectively what I like to call the golden thread. Excuse me. So again, just thinking out loud. So in terms of what I'm going at here, so not uncertainty, certainty. So this idea actually was born from an article which I read recently, which basically suggested that the consistently poor track record of infrastructure delivery in this country is largely driven by sort of self-imposed red tape and regulatory complexity. And the argument was basically that these projects are in national interest to deliver on time and to budget. And yet it's the very systems designed to protect that interest which are ultimately slowing them down and even driving schedule and cost overruns. And I was really reflecting on that, and it got me thinking about whether or not I agreed with it, because in reality, I don't think that these are risks in the way that we often frame them. So things, as you can see on the screen, like planning permissions, ecology considerations, stakeholder engagements, things like that, they aren't particularly unknown. They're not volatile. They're not unpredictable. They're well established. They're repeatable. They're largely well understood constraints, not particularly novel. Now, I do also acknowledge that there will be emerging policies and regulatory changes that do genuinely introduce uncertainty, but that's not what I'm referring to here. Here I'm referring to the constraints that are consistently present across the projects, regardless of the sector or scale. So for me, the challenge isn't that these things are too onerous or too uncertain. The challenge is that we often fail to fully account for them from the outset, or at least that's what I've seen in my experience. So my challenge often on projects is that these aren't actually risks. They are just conditions of delivery, which just aren't very well prepared for. So again, I don't feel like we're necessarily dealing with uncertainty. Again, I caveat that there will be some emerging policies and procedures which do sort of fit that narrative. But yeah, I feel like we aren't dealing with uncertainty specifically. We're misclassifying certainty and ultimately how it's treated. So as I mentioned, across all industries, regardless of the scope and the context, there will always be sort of onerous regulatory processes which we need to abide by. And in my case in particular, I've noticed that these have been the biggest risks on the register, the big juicy red risks. And my challenge would be to think of them not as risks to manage later, but certainties that should define the baseline from day one. And I appreciate that might sound obvious, and there might be people listening and hearing this thinking, we already do that. But in reality, it doesn't always show up that way in delivery, from my personal experience. QRA. So for those of you that aren't aware, QRA stands for Quantitative Risk Analysis. It's something that I've spent a lot of time and effort in the past sort of 5 or 6 years of my career. And so naturally, it was one of my key reflections when I was thinking about illusion of certainty in projects. So just a caveat, QRA is obviously an extremely powerful tool when it's used properly, and where it challenges our thinking rather than just confirming it, which is obviously really important. And again, just to be clear, this isn't a criticism of the tool or anybody using it. At its best, it helps us really understand uncertainty, identify key drivers, which is really important, and also helps to support better decision-making. But in practice, what can sometimes happen is we take uncertain inputs, like assumptions that aren't fully understood, like I mentioned earlier, and risks that aren't always very well defined, and run them through a model. And what comes out is a number, and that number very quickly becomes the answer in inverted commas. And that's where the illusion can sometimes start. Sometimes QRA doesn't challenge the plan per se, it actually legitimizes it. And we stop challenging it, the outputs that is, in the same way that we would challenge the inputs. There's something which, as you can see on screen, it's garbage in, garbage out. You're only as good as the inputs, and also garbage in, gospel out, which for me is very, very topical, because oftentimes it can feel, just because we've put suboptimal inputs through some form of quantitative analysis, some science, which has got bells and whistles, oh, it must make sense, it must be gospel, when of course that's absolutely not the case. Something else that I've seen quite regularly, which is answer shopping, which is rerunning the model to get a more palatable outcome. And again, I absolutely say that is different to reviewing an iteration of a model and sort of understanding, does it pass the Kegel test? Maybe it's not giving the answer that we quite expected, not because it's not palatable, but because maybe something's not quite interfacing the models we expected. Two very, very different things. That's not what I'm talking about here. Or misinterpreting the output. So take, for example, P50, sometimes we can say, oh, that's the most likely, or it's the mean, or the P80 is treated as the safe option. So however, rather than just saying QRA creates the illusion of certainty, I'd like to reframe it to suggest that it can either reinforce false certainty, or actively challenge it. So a couple of key recommendations here off the back of sort of QRA, and this is for the benefit of people who may be on the call who are actually responsible for running risk analyses, or it's just for the benefit of people who are the recipients of the outputs. So number one, challenge inputs harder than the outputs. Most of the scrutiny, from my experience, particularly from the SLT, senior leadership team, tends to happen once the outputs are developed, but the real value sits in challenging the inputs, the correlations and the logics in the first instance. If you can't defend the inputs, then don't trust the outputs. And a risk model doesn't necessarily fix poor understanding. As I mentioned, that gospel in, garbage in, gospel out, it amplifies it. Number two, present ranges, not points. So the moment you present a single number, people anchor to that. Even if you explain distributions, they'll remember one date, one cost, one answer. And oftentimes when you provide a report, even with that caveat, it will make its way through multiple layers of the P3 environment. And oftentimes the detail gets stripped out to more and more high-level information. So if your team benchmarks against a particular percentile, for example, let's say a P50, show them the curtain between P0 and P50 and hold that mirror up. This means that you're comfortable with the project finishing somewhere between here and here. Differentiate between certainty and uncertainty. So if everything is certain, nothing is understood. Expose weak assumptions in challenging, and also the so what, focus on the drivers, not just the output. So what all this really comes back to is QRA doesn't create certainty, but if we're not careful, it can make uncertainty actually feel certain, and that can be where illusion starts. Conscious of time, so last couple of slides, sorry, Sarah. So known but not acted on. So again, something very, very topical, which hopefully people can, whether or not you're a risk practitioner or not, can go away with this information and try and use it to the best of your ability. So a lot of organizations and projects that I've worked on, and I include myself in this, can sometimes fall into what I would describe as risk accounting. And to be clear, that's not because people are bad at the jobs. In fact, it sometimes applies to some of the best risk managers of the industry. But what project teams are particularly good at is identifying risk, quantifying them, capturing them, discussing them, documenting them. And oftentimes you're sort of drawn to abide by arbitrary health metrics. They're not, okay, arbitrary is probably a little bit harsh. I think health metrics are important, but they're not the be all and end all. And that oftentimes can be where it stops, and ultimately where the value stops. The risks aren't meaningfully acted on. They don't change any behaviors. They don't reshape the program. They don't materially influence decisions. They sit in registers and they're reported on, but they don't integrate into how the project's actually being delivered. And again, this is another way in how that illusion of certainty is maintained, because on paper, it looks like we've addressed the risk, we mistake capturing it for managing it, and that's how the illusion of certainty is created. So moral of the story is, even the best risk management processes won't add the intended value if they don't influence behaviors and decision making. So very final slide then, just to leave a couple of key thoughts. Certainty doesn't always equal removing uncertainty. Certainty for me comes from being honest and understanding. Precision doesn't always equal accuracy. Just because something looks precise, it doesn't mean it's correct. The difference between, and converting certainty to resilience. So the difference between certainty and resilience for me is assuming things go well, and one is being prepared when they don't. Leveraging uncertainty to your advantage, it's absolutely fine. In fact, it's optimal to say, I don't know. Like I say, it's in fact probably the most honest and open way to start. If I was to ask people on this call, how long does it take you to drive to your local shop? You'd probably be able to give me a very precise answer. You've done it before, you understand the route. Variability is low, there's a level of certainty there. However, if I was to ask you how long it would take you to drive to Vienna, the answer would naturally be very different. You'd start thinking in ranges, you'd challenge assumptions, you'd consider variables, traffic, route choice, stops, even things things you can't be specific about. So the goal isn't to be certain, it's to be prepared. And then lastly, so we often talk about certainty as if it's something that we need to achieve, but for me, certainty, as I've already alluded to, doesn't come from removing uncertainty. It comes from understanding it and planning for it properly. And the goal isn't to eliminate it, it's to use it. It isn't to eliminate uncertainty, it's to use it, it's to service it early, it's to challenge it properly, and it's to build plans that reflect in reality how projects actually behave, because ultimately the projects that succeed aren't the ones that pretend uncertainty doesn't exist. They're the ones that are built to handle it. And I'll just leave you all with a little mic drop moment that certainty for me isn't about being right, it's about being ready.
Beautiful. What a good way to finish it, Pat. Round of applause. Fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. I think what's really interesting is hearing, what you've been saying, and then also what Edith was saying as well around, these tools, they don't make something less certain, kind of more certain, but they do help you to organize all of that. If we know all this stuff, why aren't we doing it?
It's a very, very good question. I feel like, again, I feel like from a certainty perspective, it's about being honest and it's about being prepared. And like I say, from my personal experience working in projects, particularly from the outset, I'm not tone deaf to neglect the fact that leadership team need confidence, stakeholders need assurance, and we need some level of understanding about what it is we're trying to achieve. And it's come down to that old adage that fail to plan, plan to fail. So I'm absolutely not advocating that that shouldn't be the case. I think what I'm advocating is just being honest in our shortfalls, particularly when you're working in environments like if you're in an option E, for example, where the clarity of the scope is extremely uncertain. Even when you're working in fixed price contracts, you might have delivered the scope 100 times, but I still feel like behaviorally there's elements, like I say, around really on the project I'm on at the moment, it was around ecology and around planning permissions, and it's a conversation that I'm having with the project team consistently. Is like, this isn't a particularly, even though it's the scope hasn't been delivered to this scale before. It's not the way that we consent projects and the way that we interact with the environment. For me, isn't unique. It's been that way since time immemorial. So I think the reason that we don't do it is still because of that anchoring to certainty, because we'll see whether or not it's conscious or subconscious. The goalpost gets set early doors, and there's very little flexibility in how we approach that as we move forward. So sorry, I've gone a little bit off piece there, Sarah. So I think the reason we don't do it is because seemingly we just don't take certainty seriously enough.
And perhaps in the sort of deepest, darkest parts of our souls, we really want the project to happen or something like that as well. So brilliant. Again, Pat, so much more that we could talk about, but absolutely brilliant. Everyone, please put your hands together for the fabulous Pat Bradshaw. Thank you very much, mate. Fantastic.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Great. So now we're coming into the last presentation of our session this morning, which is session 2 of 6 for our Responsible Raw Materials Conference. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to our virtual stage Maria Amparo Alban. Now, Maria, as you will see, is chair of the of Women in Mining Ecuador, but is also very much an expert in the sector as a whole, and is going to speak to us about building resilience and inclusion in the Latin American mining industry. So today we've had everybody from Australia, Indonesia, the Philippines, and we're finishing up with Ecuador. Maria, over to yourself.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to share with you some ideas on how to build resilience and inclusion for the mining sector in Latin America. First, I think a bit of a disclaimer about Latin America. When I speak about Latin America, I have to be careful because it's a world in itself, and it's very diverse. The countries have different realities, and it's very asymmetric in terms of capacity, territory, and GDP and other parameters. So this is important to understand. It's a very extensive region, but all the countries share great natural resources, water availability, agricultural land, and historically are rich in minerals. This is something that has been lately playing out very importantly since the energy transition began. The other point that I must raise is that democracies and institutions are not as strong as we would like them to be in the region. So you all often go from different places of weak instability or instability and weak institutions in terms of policies and institutions that guide the development in the countries. So when this trend and when we acknowledge the energy transition that was going on in the worldwide, the region took a time to develop the response. I would say was more reactive, but lately, the last 3-4 years have been really important, determining the path for the region, especially the capacities and the potential of the region. It's important. Sorry. Oh. So the energy transition is showing geopolitical competition and is driving unprecedented capital flows to the region. This is a new situation, I would say, for the region, which is organizing its capacities. The region also has a great potential, holds 40% of global copper output and around 68% of the world lithium reserves in the lithium triangle, compounded by Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia. Recently, Bolivia recovering the institutional interest and capacity to exploit undeveloped lithium industry in Bolivia. And Latin America captures, as some will know, the largest market value for mine output globally, above 120 billion, believed for 2030. So this is the situation in Latin America. Great expectancy on how the energy transition will guide the development of the different countries. Most of the countries, especially in South America, are rich in minerals, in different minerals, copper, gold, lithium, and organizing the economies, attracting investment, and being part of this energy transition, which of course has some challenges as well. And I was mentioning or naming resilience as a main word in the presentation, because I think the region is showing resilience in terms of what is aiming to do and how development minerals, the critical minerals industry is proposing for the region. The strategic position of Latin America in the global mining industry is very beneficial right now. Main M&As in global share are in the region, happening in the region, projected investment above 230 billion by 2033. And the almost short supply is driving the investment in copper and lithium in the region. So the resources, we acknowledge the resources the world needs for its energy transition are concentrated greatly in Latin America. The strategic question for the region in many countries like mine is not whether to mine or not to mine, is the how. And that is a very, very fundamental question that the different countries are trying to respond. What kind of institutions and laws are required, and how to explain to the societies that this is, besides Peru and Chile that have been dedicated their development the last 25-30 years, and Chile more, to develop upon the mining industry. The rest of the countries are somehow new to intense developing of a mining industry, and require to review the capacities in terms of institutions and laws. How to treat investment is very important. Also, how to understand the role of mining industry in the economic and social contributions that are bringing jobs to the communities, that are not only posing threats to the environment, as many believe, which is happening, especially with illegal mining in vast Amazonian territories, but how to use the momentum to help develop this conservation side, or I would say biodiversity conservation potential for the industry in driving innovation. We see many initiatives being developed greatly, especially renewable electricity, renewable power taking place in many cases in Brazil, 100%, like Vale's renewable electricity. But other countries are thinking right now how to use the mining industry development to increase the use of renewable electricity. So this innovation aspect is also happening, and it's driving great innovation. The other aspect in terms of social contributions is the ILO Convention 169 that has become a centerpiece of the discussion on how to address communities, the free prior informed consent that is required from communities, especially Aboriginal communities, and the new Escazú Agreement, which is a sister or convention to Aarhus Convention, which is based on or promoting public participation within vast territories when these projects take place, especially energy, oil, and in particular mining projects. So this is becoming an important part of how the mining industry is being assessed in our countries. How are we implementing these conventions is becoming the critical, I would say, door to the projects in the territories. Most of the countries in Latin America are part of large multilateral, I would say, important conventions, multilateral agreements. They're signed by most countries, not only biodiversity convention, which is I would say, driving an important institutional capacity in our countries. Many countries in the region are mega diverse countries, which means that we have more biodiversity than others around the Amazonian area, Mexico as well, and some Central American countries. So how do we address mining relates greatly to how to implement multilateral agreements, especially environmental multilateral agreements. So this is also important in the way that the industry is being, especially responsible mining, is willing to present itself. Also the role of community development and how the mining industry is bringing some potential to build infrastructure, to help with education in different rural areas that are remote, is being discussed and largely analyzed as a great positive impact. How to keep the social license to operate is been part of the discussion lately. And as it's been lately discussed, it's a great issue. It's being treated now as a geological risk or a legal risk or financial risk, how to keep the social license, which is not a permit, is not something that we follow and check out, but is how to keep convincing a community that the mining industry and a project is bringing value to the community. So this is becoming challenging. It's always been challenging. I would say more now that there is great pressure on mining projects. So companies are now treating social risk as comparable to geological risk, and social license failures can quickly shut down billion-dollar operations. We saw that in Cobre Panama, and that was the first time, not the first time a project was shut down in Latin America or in South America, but the first time we saw a project that was in operation, bringing financial value to the government, being shut down, which was a great, I would say, change in conversation on how the communities are feeling about mining. And of course, after that and before that, many rulings, many legal actions against mining that have ended in rulings ordering shutdowns or stoppage of projects until some conditions are met or indefinitely. So this is important because we combine the economic and social contribution with the risk and the environmental perception on how project could create impacts or higher or negative impacts to a region. And this is where the mining industry is navigating in Latin America at this moment. On the inclusion side, there is great progress. We see increasing the participation of women in mining across the region. Around 10 to 16% of the payroll is women. Chile has a higher than 20%, Ecuador 19%, but it varies. But we see increasing. So inclusion has been developing lately in the industry, in the responsible mining industry. And I have to make this difference because there is also an increase in illegal mining in the territories in Latin America. Female representation in Chile, for instance, has grown, as I was mentioning, BHP, showing pride, 40% of their payroll is women. And it's important to make a note, when the companies include women, many good things happen. One of those is a lower injury rate in gender balanced crews, around 67%. And in terms of returns, and it higher rate, 38 compared to 32, all male gender boards in many companies. So we see that there is an acknowledgement on how including women in the industry is bringing benefits. So we see this, but we cannot yet produce or create legal frameworks that benefit female participation, which is something that is the interest is growing because the industry is going through a period. In one hand, the expectation for the energy transition that is bringing investment in copper, in lithium into the region, but as well, the last 5, 6, 7 years, an anti-mining sentiment that has been creating problems in many projects in South America, especially in Central America as well. And this has to do with some environmental and historic damage and legacy mine sites, and a bad probably legacy in terms of oil exploitation in the Amazon, as in my country or other countries. In Brazil, accidents as that took place, like Mariana and others, have I would say caused a problem with the perception of the security of the operations, and this is something that is slowly created some anti-mining sentiment in many communities, which has made it difficult to start the projects. Absence of meaningful prior community consultation is something that is being perceived as a failure, and communities create or resent having projects that are not making them part of it. Perceived inequity in benefit sharing agreements, how they understand or how communities see the different benefits and balances in terms of returns for the company that is investing and the government, the taxes, and what the communities actually get from a project is also in the conversation. And illegal mining happening in the Amazon countries. And I would say also an anti-capitalistic radicalism that has been growing in the last years. So all this is the negative feelings that the mining industry is fighting in the region. So it's important to make a note on this, because it in one hand is great potential. We see great potential with the development and investment in critical minerals, but also the challenges are important. So to combat that, to combat this perception, negative perception and anti-mining sentiment, it's important to discuss the standards, and that's the conversation that is happening in the region. So FPIC consultations and public consultations is a minimum for any project. Transparency in benefit sharing, transparency in terms of taxes. EITI is standard, for instance, being promoted by the government and by the companies as well. Independent environmental monitoring that can engage with communities and make them part of the monitoring is also critical. Promoting ESG standards, IFC standards 5 and 6 are critical, and others like mitigation hierarchy, standards for biodiversity, which is important that they take place in very early on as in exploration, and of course the battling with illegal mining in many concessions in the region. This is the context of the industry, but the conversation in the last, I would say, 2 years regarding how to fight these causes that create anti-mining sentiment is being developed, and I'm very optimistic of the resilience of the industry in the region and how the perception is changing. The Cobre Panama case identified, I think, and it rang an alarm on how perception, or a negative perception that is building up and is not being addressed, neither by the government nor by the company, creates a huge negative response that can shut down a huge operation that, in the case of Panama, was responsible for 5% of the GDP. So how can a project that is responsible for the 5% of the GDP, it can be shut down? Is an important question. What are those causes? Why we need to work on the standards and also on perception, communicating, and creating the conditions so the society in the region trust the mining industry standards. I'm not going to talk much about the political side, but I'm researching on the political economy of sustainable development in the case of mining in the region, especially in my country, and how that was molded the last decades. But it's important in a positive note to talk about the local investment and the rural development that is happening and how communities are changing. In the case of Ecuador, there is only one province that has two mines in development. One is copper, one is gold, one Canadian, one Chinese. And it's important to take note of this case. This province has moved from the 20th place in terms of of paying taxes to the 4th place, and increased the GDP, the province GDP, by 15 times. So this is just a small example of what can be brought by responsible mining in small countries and in the region. So policy frameworks are needed, rural entrepreneurship. That is the case in the province of Zamora, which I'm referring to now. The company that organized to supply for one of the companies, one of the projects, is now the 4th taxpayer in the province. So value chain creation is important and is one of the byproducts that are critical in the rural development related to the mining operation. The other important piece of information on how this is a great idea is the mining industry can bring a great potential is the biodiversity offsets and ecological restoration that is happening in mining projects. For many countries, it's really hard to keep up with restoration or with conservation areas. So mining projects, responsible mining projects, they do have an opportunity to contribute to ecological restoration by incorporating biodiversity offsets. In some countries, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, this is being required, even now in Ecuador. It's not a mandatory requirement, but countries do it to show additionality and part of the management, environmental management plan. This is very important. This is something that creates trust, but also develops the capacity of the local communities to engage in restoration, be part of the conservation initiatives, and will help. And in some countries, it's now already helping biodiversity credits development, and the disclosure of initiative is being reported. So this is one of the, I would say, this is one of the pluses that the mining industry has created and needs to continue creating to combat that negative feeling or the anti-mining sentiment that has grown in the last years for many reasons, as I discussed. But this is the type of trend that we need to insist to develop. Investment to the countries is what is creating the right now a healthy competition among countries, trying to bring investment to the region, and this is opening up or inviting newcomers like Argentina, for instance, and all the countries that are attracting great amounts of foreign direct investment for especially lithium and copper projects with great joint ventures with majors in most of the cases. So we can predict that the region is positioning itself as a region that is trying to take advantage of what the world is requiring in terms of the energy transition, and will be positioning as I would say a top provider. It's already in the case of Chile and copper, but the other countries are trying to catch up. Brazil as well, with a great, huge potential, and other countries, Peru, Argentina, and even Ecuador and Colombia that are coming behind, and now Bolivia that is going back to the market. It was impressive to see Bolivia back in PDC with projects ready just few weeks or months after a new president-elect. So every country that has potential is aligning with this initiative to become a great supplier for the energy transition. Looking ahead is important for the region to keep in mind a few lessons. The region is a resilient region, and the sector, the mining industry, is a very strong and resilient industry. The key part of the conversation is how to create strong institutions that favor foreign direct investment. This has been very irregular among countries, that it has varied through different governments. So that type of vision is required to keep steady flow of investment coming to develop the industry. How the rule of law is a core value for this. The region, especially some countries, have a track record in an arbitration process with investors. So how to create stronger institutions that respect the rule of law, how to work for stronger regulators, dependencies or ministries or secretaries that have good regulations, and that can help assess properly the impacts of these projects and how to develop them, and keep the timeline in place. Lately, the timeline for mining project in the region goes to 1 year to 2, 3, 4 years, which is something that wears out the interest of investors. So to work on regulations, to adopt more transparency standards like the EITI, it's definitely something that will create possibilities, and it's being worked now, supported by the World Bank in the region, to keep implementing social and environmental standards like the IFC standards and others that are coming to create opportunities, social opportunities and environmental opportunities as well. And the local investment to increase social returns is mandatory. Those are mandatory because the communities need to know that they have an opportunity engaging with mining projects. This is not minor. In the case of Ecuador, we have a regulation that 60% of the royalties paid by any project must go back to the local communities. And of course, we just have 2 projects, but this is something that we think will make the local communities and rural communities understand the value of developing mining projects nearby, and of course engage in being part of the value chain, creating capacities, and in terms of women and the inclusion and allowing women to take part of this. Women are organizers, community organizers, and the value of having not only in decision-making positions or in technical positions in projects, but also with the community. The role of women is beneficial to keep up with this social returns, to keep up with the consultation, and of course with the social license that, as I was mentioned, is critical for the projects. So the Latin American, especially South American countries, are strongly betting on critical minerals right now. But we need to create, I would say, wider conscious of what needs to be done. Stronger institutions, better regulations, transparency, investing in social and environmental standards, and including more women in the value chain and in projects. Will create stronger possibilities for the region to take advantage of the energy transition supplying minerals worldwide.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Maria. My mind is blown by some of those statistics that you shared, especially with regards to the gender balanced crews, and the impact that has on safety. That's amazing.
Yeah, this is something that has been known by instinct, but now it's been measured. And this is important. Even the discussion on a board, the discussion that takes place in a board changes completely. I have been the only woman in boards, and I can say that when a woman takes place, the leadership takes place, the conversation changes. All male boards tend to be monothematic. It's a structure. But when there is a woman there, it's quite disruptive, with different questions, with different approaches on communities, on environment, and that creates awareness. So I would say that we need to encourage leadership as well, not only in the projects, management, technical positions, but as well in boards, because the decisions and the values and the vision, and of course the principles are top-down driven.
Absolutely. Brilliant. So with that, thank you so much, Maria. Everyone, round of applause for the fantastic Maria.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Excellent. So we're going to go straight into a very quick panel session, and I want to bring Jamie onto the stage. So Jamie Strauss has just joined us. Jamie runs a company called Digby that does lots of reviews of projects all over the world. But Jamie, we've done a number of them recently in South America. I wonder if you've got any comments you'd like to make to Maria's presentation.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to Responsible Raw Materials and all of the panelists earlier this morning. I'll just be brief. I think the key thing I want to, just say in reflection is we had a customer recently, and I think it can be quite open, it's AbraSilver, who had discovered and grown their resource base really, really quickly, been a hugely successful company, but very much realized 12, 18 months ago that perhaps a lot of the stuff on top of the surface had rather kind of got lost behind a little bit with some of the speed of the resource side of things. And so they came to us, asking us to help them on this. And it's really taken them from a position of being slightly underwhelming from how can we economically take this project forward to a company and a project that whether or not they build this project or they ultimately sell the project, effectively have filled all the gaps, have filled the holes, have got a social license which they can be proud of and are protecting, have identified areas within regards to some of the water challenges that they've got. All of these things have effectively been dealt with. And I think where this comes back to, and I think it was Maria, but also Pat in the previous one, is that this company is now prepared. It knows where a lot of its risks are. There are no certainties in mining, as we all know, but I think one of the key points is that where issues do materialize, they're better prepared, they're better organized, they're more resilient, which I think was a word that came up in Mark's presentation yesterday. The company is more resilient to some of these challenges. So my three final points would be, the one key thing from my perspective from finance is sophisticated capital has arrived in this industry. Sophisticated capital has replaced the void that was there, which was left by the blow up of the hedge funds in the 2000s. Sophisticated capital is dominating the environment and requesting and requiring a professionalization of this sector with regards to management teams. That's a massive positive, nevertheless, a transition to go through. The second point is, and it is a certainty, is that financial institutions and insurance sector, and I think that's something we're going to hear a lot more from in coming days, weeks, and months, are judging companies by more than just geology. It is no longer the geology that dominates the value of these things and therefore the direction of travel. And the third thing, and my final point, is preparation, preparedness. It provides not only resilience, as we've just spoken, but it also provides efficiency. It attracts capital. It attracts capital beyond just the dollar of that last investment. It attracts names, it attracts quality, and allows you to be able to stand out relative to your peers, not only in the financial community, but also amongst your peers and with your communities and permitters. So thank you very much indeed, and hopefully that was reasonably short and sharp for me.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Jamie. And a beautiful summary. You don't need me to do this anymore. But I was wondering, maybe if we
I've learned.
quickly work around the room. Joe, do you want to start us off? You've been sitting there, and it's been amazing seeing some of your offers behind during the session. What's really stuck in your mind from this morning's talks? Because they have been eclectic in terms of the variety that we've had. So if we go to Joe first, then maybe if we go to Pat.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's a bit of movement behind me. I had to move out of the meeting room I was in. I think it's really interesting, kind of like from a personal perspective, when I was thinking about what I wanted to discuss today, and then when you hear how diverse everyone's perspective on this topic has been as well, I think it's so fascinating just to get like different people's personal perspectives, and we've had people from across the world as well, so we're getting a very diverse like geographical perspective there too, but also people from different expertise and specialities. So I think kind of getting that perspective on how creating a certainty in a world of change is positioned from so many different understandings has been really fascinating, and I've really enjoyed hearing everyone's discussion. So yeah, thanks everyone. I've learnt so much this morning.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Joe. Pat, how about yourself? And then we'll go to Edith.
Well, I think from my perspective, first I was very flattered, Sarah, when you asked me, but the imposter syndrome creeps in, and then hearing the first few speakers, it was flying through the roof. How talented at speaking and all of the interesting topics they discussed. I think the key thing that I've learnt on is more from a personal perspective, really, is the theme of certainty and uncertainty, regardless of the sector, regardless of the context of the presentation, all boils back to similar themes, really. What we were discussing is that uncertainty isn't always bad, and certainty can be a bit of an enemy in some instances. Even when I was putting the presentation together, and even when I was listening to some of the guest speakers before me, I was actually amending my notes in my presentation to think, oh God, I hadn't thought of that. So I personally have just taken a great deal away that I can go and implement. And I'll be honest, I'm pleasantly surprised because, like I say, people from all over the world, different walks of life, different sectors. I was wondering how transferable it would be, but I think the general theme of uncertainty and certainty was a very, very useful topic to choose, because I've taken a huge amount away from everybody, all the talented speakers. So thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Pat. Edith, how about yourself? And if Deanne is still there and hasn't been washed away by the rainstorm, we'll then go to
Yes,
Indonesia.
the rain is stopped finally. Thank you, Alhamdulillah.
Brilliant.
But still unstable, the connections, internet. Thank you
Okay.
for having me. I'm
Absolutely.
always happy for someone that would like to listen about the ISM situation in Indonesia, because we are seeking for more networking and support, because what happened in the area, in the field, is very critical now in Indonesia, especially for the woman. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure, Deanne, and thank you so much for your presentation. It was incredibly eye-opening, absolutely brilliant. Thank you. Edith, how about yourself? Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm happy for the opportunity to actually share about my work, and also to hear about all of the interesting things that everyone is doing. As someone who doesn't come from a mining background myself, it's really important for me to actually see that it's not just about digging some rocks up. There's more to it. There's the people that are involved, there's the environment that is involved, and then it's also realizing that the uncertainty itself, it will always be there, but then we just need to be transparent about what we know versus what we don't. So thank you to everyone.
Yeah, no, absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Edith. So just to wrap up, we've heard from 6 phenomenal speakers over the course of our second session of 6 in Responsible Raw Materials this year. So Joe, first of all, said that water should be part of project design rather than a risk that we consider later. And I think that was a theme that was then built upon perhaps by, for example, Pat, where we were talking about we need to actually we don't want to go answer shopping. And how do we get ahead of all this stuff? We know what we should be doing. It's just that often when we're designing our projects and executing them, we just don't appear to do it. Then Deanne from Indonesia, absolutely brilliant in terms of talking about the different paradoxi, or conundrums between the regulatory, economic, and governance aspects with regards to artisanal and small-scale mining. And because whilst there is some structure there, because it's not really working, it makes the artisanal small-scale mining illegal, which of course is a massive problem. But again, the solutions are right there at our fingertips. We then hopped across to the Philippines, where Dennis described some of the research that's going on there and the importance of social scientists in research projects, and actually leading with the social aspects, not with the technical angles, which I know makes all of the engineers and scientists on the call feel a little bit twitchy. But wow, does it end up in so much more success when we put the social science first? It's amazing what happens there. Christopher Van Doom from Chatham House then gave us insight into, I don't know, some of the thinking and the approaches from the US government, the UK government, Zambia and Botswana with regards to critical minerals. And gosh, it is varied and so deeply cultural to those different countries. I think it's fascinating. So if you listen to Christopher's talk and then go back to, say, Isabel's talk from yesterday and match the two of them together, and I think trying to understand how governments and those kind of decision makers work is really interesting. Edith then took us through some of the research that she's doing with regards to ecosystem services and some of the tools that we can use. And what I loved you say there, Edith, was that tools don't remove uncertainty, but they can help you to organize it, which was brilliant. And then finally, of course, we finished up with Maria. And Maria, I confess I was doing print screening all the way through your presentation to steal your statistics. But it was absolutely fantastic. And I think what that allowed us also to do is, in today's session of 6 speakers, not only have we included the Philippines, Indonesia, Australia, the UK, Malawi, but also Ecuador as well. So we've done pretty good, good going in terms of including different geographies around the world and a diversity of different backgrounds. So with that, of course, we're not even halfway through Responsible Raw Materials. The next session actually starts at 12 o'clock. So in just under an hour's time, and that is a special lunchtime or insert, whatever meal it might be, depending on where you are in the world, session to do a watch along for 100 Perceptions Raw Materials, which is a documentary that we made last year. It was launched almost exactly a year ago, and we've won awards for it, which is pretty cool. So this half an hour or 30-minute long documentary explores the journey of 100 volunteers who came along to the Natural History Museum in London for an evening. They didn't know why they were coming. And apparently they had lots of fun. And the focus was all about raw materials. So what's happening at 12 o'clock is a number of the producers and the crew who actually made the film are coming to join us for a chat. We're then doing a watch along all together. And then afterwards, we're going to be joined by some of the researchers who are behind the science, be it the social science or the more physical science that went into making the documentary. So that's happening from 12 o'clock to 1:30. So that starts in just under an hour. And then at 3 o'clock this afternoon, UK time, so that's in 4 hours' time, we have session 3 of Responsible Raw Materials. Thank you very much, Aileen. And as you can see, we've got a phenomenal lineup of speakers. They include everybody from phenomenal researchers in South Africa, such as Dineo and Michelle. We've got Nigel Hart, who very much comes from the investment side within mining. So Jamie was mentioning an element of that. We've got Julia Sutcliffe, or Professor Julia Sutcliffe, who is the Chief Scientific Advisor to the UK government with regards to critical materials. Pippa Edwards, who excels in understanding supply chains, etc. And it carries on. So phenomenal speakers that we have for you this afternoon. That is session 3 of 6. As always, we're recording everything. We're sticking it up online very quickly. Go and catch up with us on the website. But with that, a massive thank you to all of our speakers from the session just now. Truly phenomenal. Round of applause for all of you. And we'll see you all very shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. We'll